There are places on this planet that refuse to give up their secrets. Giant stones shaped with impossible accuracy. Ruins that sit thousands of feet above sea level, with no clear way to build them. Artifacts made with technology no one thought existed back then. And in some cases, entire civilizations that left behind no explanation, only silence. These aren't just strange stories passed down over time. These are real, documented, measured, excavated, and still, no one can explain how they came to be. From underground cities carved into solid rock, to structures that seem to defy physics itself, the ancient world is filled with questions we've never been able to answer. So stay with me, because today we're diving headfirst into one of these unsolved mysteries. But before we begin, they say people who like and subscribe before the video ends tend to uncover more of the truth than anyone else. The stone walls that shouldn't exist. Sacsayhuaman. High above the city of Cusco in Peru, standing silently on a green plateau, there lies something that no one has ever truly explained. A structure so old, so impossibly precise, that even now, with all the tools and technology we have, we still don't know how it was made. This place is called Sacsayhuaman. It looks like just a pile of stone walls, but look closer and you'll see that it's something far stranger than that. Massive stones, some weighing more than 100 tons, are cut and fit together with such perfection, there's not even room to slide a single piece of paper between them. And these aren't small bricks. These are blocks the size of cars, some the size of small buses. They curve, bend, and interlock like a 3D puzzle. And yet there's no mortar, no glue, just perfect fit and silence. Now modern engineers have tried to explain it. They say maybe the stones were softened with plant extracts, or maybe ancient builders made full-scale models before cutting the real blocks. But no theory explains everything, because here's the strange part. We can't even replicate this today. Not easily, not with the same exact fit, not on this scale. Some of the stones have more than 12 angles, all perfectly matched to the stones around them. This wasn't just stacking, it was sculpting, at a level that borders on unbelievable. And it gets weirder, because these walls were made before the Inca Empire even existed. Yes, the Inca used this place, they respected it, they added their own touches, but they didn't build the core. Even they said so. The Inca legends say that Sacsayhuaman was built by giants, or by gods, or by a race of unknown people who had skills that humans later lost. They called it the work of the first ones. And when you stand next to those stones, when you run your hand across the surface, smooth in places, rippled in others, it's easy to believe those stories. Some researchers have even found magnetic anomalies inside the walls, spots where a compass behaves strangely, areas that feel colder to the touch, even when bathed in sunlight. Coincidence? Maybe. But when a structure defies tools, logic, and time, you start to wonder if you're looking at something more than architecture. Some say the stones are remnants of a lost technology, a method of construction we haven't rediscovered. Others believe this place was built not just for defense or ceremony, but for energy. Yes, energy. The angles, the materials, the positioning. They say it was meant to harness the natural forces of the earth. And yet, no one really knows. There are no written records, no blueprints, only the stones and questions. As the sun sets over the Peruvian Andes and the wind moves through the grass, Sacsayhuaman just sits there, quiet, watching. It's been here for thousands of years, through wars, earthquakes, civilizations rising and falling. Still the walls stand, still perfect, still untouched, still refusing to explain how or why they were made, because some things were meant to remain unsolved. The megaliths of Baalbek, stones that shouldn't exist. In the quiet hills of Lebanon, far from the noise of modern cities, there stands a platform so massive, so perfectly placed, it shouldn't exist. It's called Baalbek, but it goes by many names. To some, it's the home of Roman ruins. To others, it's a temple site. But to a few who've looked closely, it may be something far older than anyone's willing to admit. Because hidden beneath the ruins of Baalbek lies something almost impossible. Stones, not just large stones, but some of the largest ever used in construction. Massive blocks, each weighing between 800 and 1,000 tons, somehow quarried, transported, and lifted into place over 2,000 years ago, or maybe even longer. Now here's where it gets strange. Modern cranes, the biggest ones we have, still struggle to move a single one of these blocks today. That's using today's technology, steel cables, hydraulic lifts, and precision teams. So how did ancient people move them? And not just move them, they placed them. 3 of the largest stones, known as the trilithon, sit perfectly aligned in a wall, set on a platform with no gaps, no mortar, no misalignment. They are not broken, they are not damaged, they are not recent. They have been sitting there for thousands of years, unmoved by earthquakes, time, or war. The Romans built on top of the site, yes, but the foundation, that's where the real mystery begins. Because the Romans, who left behind detailed records of their building feats, never mentioned moving the trilithon, never described how it was done, never claimed it as their own. Why? If the Romans didn't build the base, then who did? And when? There's no clear answer. Some researchers believe the stones were part of an older structure, perhaps a pre-Roman civilization that possessed advanced engineering knowledge long since lost. Others go further, suggesting it may date back to before the last ice age, to a time when history says humans were still living in caves. But the evidence is silent. All that's left are the stones. And just a few meters from the site, still resting in the quarry, lies another colossal block, the stone of the pregnant woman. It's even larger than the ones already placed, estimated to weigh over 1,100 tons, and yet it was never moved. Why? Some believe the builders realized it was too heavy, even for them. Others think the project was abandoned suddenly, for reasons we may never know: war, flood, a disappearance, or something else. The deeper you go, the more questions appear, because this site wasn't just for construction, it was sacred. Over time it became home to the Temple of Jupiter, one of the grandest Roman temples ever built. But again, that was later. The stones were already there, waiting. Theories range from the practical to the extraordinary. Some say ancient people used earthen ramps, dragging the stones slowly using ropes, wood, and manpower. But calculations show it would have required thousands of workers moving in perfect synchronization over kilometers of difficult terrain, with no mistakes. Others suggest ancient builders had tools or knowledge we've lost, techniques involving sound, vibration, or magnetism, ideas that still sound like science fiction to most archaeologists. And then there are those who wonder if we weren't the first advanced civilization on Earth, that maybe, long before written history began, there were people or something else capable of doing things we can't explain even now. Whether that's true or not, no one can say. What we do know is that Baalbek's foundation is not normal. It doesn't match anything else from the Roman world. It's too big, too precise, and too silent. No ancient texts, no inscriptions, no clear builder. Just a site so heavy, so massive, so perfectly made, that even modern machines hesitate to challenge it. So tonight, as you rest your head, imagine standing before that platform, the cold stones stretching endlessly in every direction, a sky of stars above you, and beneath your feet, the echo of something we've forgotten, something stronger than time, something still holding its place in the earth long after its creators disappeared, and still, no one knows how. The ancient skeletons with radioactive bones. Out in the desolate ruins of northern India, there's a city that no longer lives, only whispers. Its name is Mohenjo-Daro. Once, thousands of years ago, this city was alive, filled with perfectly straight roads, homes with private wells, and drainage systems that rival modern towns. A city so advanced, archaeologists were stunned when they uncovered it. But what truly confuses them is how it ended. Because in one particular excavation layer, something feels wrong. In the streets, they found skeletons, not buried in ritual graves, not resting peacefully, but lying as if they'd fallen mid-step. Some face down, others clutching each other. No wounds, no signs of weapons, just gone. And stranger still, their bones showed traces of radiation, Real radiation. This wasn't just a myth or internet rumor. Some of the skeletons reportedly tested at radiation levels many times higher than background levels. Levels you wouldn't expect to find outside of a modern nuclear event. How could that be? We're talking about a civilization that existed nearly 4,000 years ago, long before electricity, long before industrial anything, before iron, before glass windows, before the known world even had a name for radiation. And yet there it is, in the ruins, buried in silence. Let's slow down for a second. Imagine you're walking through the dusty remains of an ancient city. It's quiet. You pass by collapsed walls, broken pots, cracked bricks, and then you find a skeleton, arms stretched, spine twisted. It died right there. But the weird part isn't just the pose, it's what science is picking up from the bones. Now some say this could be explained away, maybe a freak natural phenomenon, maybe cosmic rays, maybe radioactive minerals in the earth. But that doesn't explain everything, because the layout of Mohenjo-Daro also baffles researchers. This city was laid out with incredible planning, straight roads meeting at perfect angles, sewers, freshwater systems, no major temples, no obvious signs of royalty or class divisions. It was a city of logic, balance, order, and it was suddenly wiped out. Some say flood, some say drought, but none of those explain the radioactive bones. And then the legends start creeping in, because nearby in ancient Sanskrit texts, long before the ruins were discovered, there are stories, terrifying stories of blinding lights, great thunder, and entire cities consumed by fire from the sky. Descriptions that today sound eerily similar to what we'd call a nuclear explosion. The Mahabharata, one of the oldest epics in the world, speaks of a weapon called the Brahmastra, a weapon so powerful it could destroy entire armies. One passage reads, "A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, brighter than 1,000 suns." Is it just mythology? Or were those ancient stories echoing something real, something witnessed? Because the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro tell a story with no clean ending. There are no mass graves, no evidence of a long, slow decline. The people didn't seem to move away, or starve, or fight each other. They simply, and the last ones fell right where they stood. Even the architecture around them. Walls melted or crystallized in ways that some say could only be caused by extreme sudden heat. Scientists don't agree. Some say it's nonsense. Others say the radiation results were never properly confirmed or published in peer-reviewed studies. And yet, nobody can fully explain the clues. Even to this day, digging deeper into Mohenjo-Daro has been slowed or stopped. Conservation efforts, bureaucracy, climate damage, but some believe there's another reason. The truth might be too strange to face, because if this was really a planned city from 4,000 years ago, with technology and structure ahead of its time, and if it was destroyed by something still not fully understood, then we may have lost more than a city. We may have lost a forgotten chapter of humanity, a chapter where people knew more than we think, where they built things we can't explain, and where just maybe they made mistakes we are still trying not to repeat. So tonight, as you drift off, remember, not every ruin is from a slow decay. Some fall, all at once, and some leave behind questions no one wants to answer. The desert eyes, no one can explain. Out in the endless sands of the Sahara Desert, there's something enormous, so enormous you wouldn't even know it was there unless you were in the sky. From ground level, it's just dunes, rock, and heat, but from far above you see it, a perfect spiral, a massive concentric formation of rings nearly 30 miles wide, almost like a giant eye carved into the desert itself. This is the Richat structure, or as some call it, the Eye of the Sahara, and it's not natural, at least not entirely. That's where the mystery begins. Most people don't know about the Eye of the Sahara. It's not in textbooks, it's barely in documentaries, but astronauts have seen it from space for decades. Even the Apollo missions used it as a landmark, because you can't miss it. The Earth doesn't make perfect rings on its own, not like this, especially not in the middle of the largest desert on the planet, and yet, there it is, still watching, still unexplained. Now here's where it gets strange. Geologists once thought it was a crater from a meteor, but no impact materials were found, no shattered rock, no melted minerals. Then they thought it was a collapsed volcano, but there's no lava, no volcanic stone, no ash. Eventually they just called it a geologic dome, a vague term, a placeholder. But some researchers and even mainstream geologists admit they still don't fully understand how the eye formed, or when, or why the layers are shaped so perfectly. And then the older theories start creeping back. Some believe this was not made by nature alone. Some believe it was once a city, not just any city, but the lost city of Atlantis. Now let's be clear, Atlantis is often dismissed as a myth, a story from Plato, a metaphor. But here's the twist. Plato's description of Atlantis, written over 2,000 years ago, matches the Eye of the Sahara almost perfectly. He wrote about a city built in concentric rings, 2 of land, 3 of water, a central island, surrounded by mountains to the north, rich in minerals, massive in size. The Eye of the Sahara matches all of that. And more importantly, it sits in a location where ancient maps used to draw mysterious landmasses, long before those areas became desert. Satellite imagery even suggests that rivers once flowed through this area. You wouldn't know it now, standing in the dry wind, but thousands of years ago, this desert might have been lush, green, and thriving. So what happened? Was the Eye once a city? Could a massive flood or shifting of the Earth's crust have erased the land, turning it to sand? Could the ancient civilization that lived there have vanished, their stories only surviving in strange myths? And what about the rock layers? Because here's something else they don't tell you. Some of the layers around the Eye appear eroded by water, deep, sweeping erosion marks. And yet this part of the Sahara hasn't seen real water in thousands of years. Who saw this? Who built it? What happened to them? Nobody knows. There's no solid evidence of buildings, no temples, no walls. But that's what makes it even more unsettling. Because if this really was a city, or even a natural formation that humans once settled around, the lack of physical remnants doesn't mean nothing happened. It might mean something very big did. Entire civilizations can disappear. Not slowly, but instantly. The earth shifts, the weather changes, the land swallows the past, and all that's left behind is an eye in the sand watching us. You can't stand in it and feel its shape. You can't see it from a hill or mountaintop, but if you close your eyes tonight and imagine flying above the earth, far above, where the clouds drift quietly, you might see it. A spiral, a perfect form, a whisper from a time we don't remember. An unsolved pattern, etched into the earth, where answers used to be. The skeletons in the lake that shouldn't be there. In the high altitudes of the Indian Himalayas, nestled over 16,000 feet above sea level, lies a glacial lake so remote that few people ever reach it. It's frozen most of the year. Silent, empty. At least that's what it seems like from a distance. But when the ice begins to melt, when the sun warms the surface just enough, something starts to emerge. Not fish, not plants, but bones. Hundreds of them. This is Rupkund Lake, often called the Lake of Skeletons, a small body of water only 40 meters wide, hiding over 300 human skeletons at its bottom. All of them appear to have died at the same time, and no one truly knows why. The first official discovery came in the 1940s during a British expedition. A patrol stumbled upon the lake and saw skulls and bones rising from the melting snow. At first they feared a massacre, maybe a lost army, maybe soldiers who perished in war. But when researchers studied the remains decades later, things only got stranger. Radiocarbon dating revealed that these people died over 1,000 years ago, sometime around the 9th century AD. But then came the twist. Not all of them died at the same time. There were 2 distinct groups, one from the 9th century, another from the 1800s, and even more mysterious, many of the skulls showed signs of massive blunt force trauma, but not from weapons. Instead, the injuries suggested something like blows to the top of the head, no defensive wounds, no signs of a battle, just fractured skulls, all from above, as if the sky itself had struck them down. For decades, this led to wild theories. Some believed they were the victims of a deadly hailstorm, killed instantly by ice the size of cricket balls. Others speculated they were pilgrims, trapped by the weather, perishing in a freak storm in the high mountains. That idea caught on. Some ancient Hindu texts do reference a royal pilgrimage gone wrong in that region, but that doesn't explain the second group, the ones who died 1,000 years later and whose skeletons were found intermingled with the first. Even stranger, recent DNA studies found the remains weren't all locals. Some had genetic links to the Mediterranean, particularly Greece and Crete, over 4,000 kilometers away. How did those people from so far away end up dead in a tiny Himalayan lake? There are no matching historical records, no carvings or scripts, no consistent oral stories, just hundreds of bones, two groups separated by centuries, and no surviving artifacts that explain why they were there, or why they never left. Scientists have suggested a few ideas. Some say the Mediterranean group may have been part of a larger migration, a lost expedition of explorers or merchants heading through unknown trade routes. Others think they may have been mercenaries, accompanying a royal group on a journey into the mountains. Some even whisper about secret crossings through the Himalayas used by ancient peoples who were mapping routes long before recorded history. But none of these theories explain why they all died in the same place, in almost the exact same manner. The terrain around Ropkund is treacherous. One wrong step can lead to a fatal fall. The weather shifts quickly, often without warning. A sudden storm, landslide, or even a glacial collapse could explain a mass death event. But still, that doesn't explain the perfectly clean skull fractures, or the eerily similar condition of so many skeletons. And again, no one has ever explained why two groups, 1,000 years apart, met the same mysterious fate in the same tiny patch of water. Even today, Ropkund Lake remains largely undisturbed. Visitors are rare, the weather makes expeditions difficult, and much of the surrounding region is sacred to local communities, so the bones stay there, quiet, frozen beneath the ice, emerging only for a few weeks each year. Every time they do, more questions arise, and fewer answers follow, because the more we learn about Ropkund, the less we understand. And some believe that's how the lake wants it, that the mountain, or something older, is still keeping it secret for now. The Rosetta Scrolls that no one can find. Far beyond the Nile, deeper than most maps dare to illustrate, there is a theory whispered quietly among a small group of archaeologists and forbidden history researchers that the Rosetta Stone was not alone, that somewhere beneath the sands or hidden within the cliffside tombs lies a collection of ancient texts, what some have dared to call the Rosetta Scrolls. It's a story that most mainstream historians avoid, because it rests on thin ice, fragments of half-recorded legends, a few misfiled museum references, and the kind of archaeological rumors that can either lead to the discovery of a lifetime or destroy reputations. Let's go back to the very beginning. The original Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, was a game-changer. With 3 inscriptions, one in Greek, one in Demotic, and one in Egyptian hieroglyphics, it allowed linguists to finally decode the symbols of ancient Egypt. Until then, no one had been able to read hieroglyphs for over 1,000 years. But what if that stone was only a summary? In 1837, a French diplomat wrote about a rumor he'd heard while stationed near the ruins of Abydos. According to his local guide, there had once been not 1, but 9 such stones, and not all were stones. Some, the guide claimed, were scrolls written on an unknown material, possibly metal or treated bark. They supposedly contained complete stories, rituals, laws, and the full timeline of Egypt's rise, and maybe even its fall. Nothing ever came of this account. Historians dismissed it as local folklore, but in the 1940s, something strange happened. A fragment of a scroll was found in a private European collection. It was thin, no more than a sliver, but it had both Egyptian hieroglyphs and what appeared to be an early form of Aramaic. The museum that analyzed it went silent. The piece vanished, and the person who donated it, he was never publicly identified. This incident lit a small fire in the community of fringe researchers. For decades, explorers tried to track down more of these alleged scrolls. Some claim to have found partial leads, boxes in old monasteries, symbols etched into desert rock faces, or carvings that didn't match any known Egyptian art. But without clear peer-reviewed findings, none of it stuck. Then came the 1992 Luxor manuscript. It's one of the most controversial documents in underground archaeology, a 23-page notebook allegedly smuggled out of a restricted dig near the Valley of the Kings. containing hand-drawn diagrams of scroll-like artifacts. The descriptions were vivid: thin, dark material coiled tightly, stored inside ceramic vessels sealed with tar. It described texts in 3 languages: hieroglyphic, Coptic, and an undeciphered script that did not match anything known. Skeptics quickly labeled it a hoax, but others noticed odd similarities between the handwriting in the Luxor manuscript and the field notes of a German archaeologist who had vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1954 while excavating a little-known tomb near Dendera. The connections get stranger. In 2007, satellite imaging revealed an unusual cavity beneath the floor of an unremarkable temple structure in Middle Egypt. The chamber, sealed and untouched, lies directly beneath a building that was rebuilt many times over centuries. Due to its alignment, some believe it was deliberately placed to hide something ancient, something older than the temple itself. But Egyptian authorities have refused excavation permits, citing instability in the structure above. They allow surveys, scans, but not digging. Those who've studied the data say the chamber is exactly the right size to hold a cache of scrolls. The position matches the vague location referenced in the Luxor manuscript. But without access, the site remains just another theory. Some researchers, frustrated by the silence from mainstream institutions, have taken their search to digital archives, hoping to trace mislabeled texts. In 2014, a team from Greece claimed to have found an anomalous parchment in the Vatican's private collection. It used 3 scripts, including hieroglyphs, and referenced a key tablet that translates the divine tongue. But within weeks of announcing their find, they retracted it. No explanation, no follow-up. That's become the pattern. Every time someone gets close to what might be one of these missing scrolls, the evidence disappears, or the researchers go silent, or the artifact ends up in private hands, locked away from public study. Now here's where it gets especially strange. There's a recurring phrase in the Luxor manuscript, translated as, "to preserve the memory before the forgetting, to write the dream so it is not lost." It appears in multiple spots. Researchers believe it might be a motto, maybe even a guiding principle behind the creation of the scrolls. And it makes some people wonder, what if the Rosetta Scrolls weren't just copies of official language? What if they were stories of forbidden knowledge? Things that certain rulers didn't want passed down? Things that had to be hidden in coded language, placed under structures that would survive for centuries, and scattered so they could only be understood together? We don't know who wrote the Luxor manuscript. We don't know if the sliver found in the 1940s was genuine. But we do know this: ancient Egypt produced more writing than any other culture of its time. Countless scrolls, papyri, and stone texts once existed, and yet we only have a tiny fraction. So the idea that there might be more is not so far-fetched, and the idea that some of them were never meant to be found, well, maybe that's why every time someone gets close, the trail vanishes. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the scrolls are doing exactly what they were designed to do: hide, until someone who understands the dream is ready to read it. The silent citadel beneath the salt plains. In the heart of a blistering desert, where wind cuts through the dry air like broken glass, and nothing seems to survive for long, there's a stretch of blinding white land. It's flat, it's quiet, and it almost looks like snow, except it's not. This is the Rann of Kutch in western India, one of the largest salt deserts in the world. But hidden beneath its cracked, crusted surface, something strange has been found, something ancient, buried deep and almost completely forgotten. The people who live nearby speak of a sleeping citadel, a place older than any known civilization in the region. And the more archaeologists dig, the more that idea refuses to go away. It started with scattered bricks, burnt red and oddly uniform. Then came shards of pottery that no local culture could explain. They were styled in ways that didn't match any known art from the Indus Valley civilization or anything before or after. That alone was strange, but the real twist came when they found entire walls laid out in what looked like grid patterns. Streets, rooms, drainage systems. The kind of layout that only comes from advanced urban planning. It wasn't a random settlement or a seasonal campsite. It was a city, and no one knows whose city it was. They called it Dolavira. At first it seemed like just another outpost of the Indus Valley people, but deeper investigation suggested something else. The layout didn't match the standard patterns of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. Dolavira had something different in the way it was designed. Instead of simply being built to last, it seemed to have been designed to hide, to disappear into its surroundings, as if it was meant to remain unseen by outsiders. And for thousands of years it worked. The salt swallowed it up, layer by layer, until all that was left was white silence. What's curious is how advanced this place was. The water systems alone show a level of planning far ahead of their time: reservoirs carved to catch monsoon rains, underground channels, and even filtration chambers. In the middle of a desert, that's not something accidental. That kind of infrastructure means they were expecting to be there for generations. But if that was the case, where did they go? There are no signs of war, no layers of ash or destruction, no mass graves, no evidence of disease. The city wasn't burned, and it wasn't abandoned in panic. It was just emptied. As if one day, the people packed everything up and walked away in silence, leaving the buildings intact, the roads clean, and the wells sealed, almost like they knew something was coming. Or maybe they were told to leave. The climate in the area did change over time. Some researchers believe the river that once ran past the city gradually dried up, making it impossible to survive. That could explain it if it weren't for the fact that other sites nearby remained occupied for much longer. And Dolavira wasn't just any settlement. It was central, strategic, symbolic. A city like that isn't abandoned lightly. Even stranger are the inscriptions. Carved into stone and found across the site are a series of symbols, many of them undeciphered. Some match the script of the Indus Valley, but others seem unique. They appear on signboards, bricks, even tools, yet no one can read them. They're the silent voices of a people we've forgotten, calling across time in a language we don't understand. And what's unsettling is that some of the symbols have faint similarities to characters found in places far away from Mesopotamia to Easter Island. Coincidence, or evidence of a global exchange long before our history books allow? The deeper researchers dig, the more bizarre the site becomes. At one end of the citadel, they found what appears to be a stepped reservoir, built with such precision that it could pass for modern engineering. Some believe it wasn't just for water storage. The acoustics of the structure suggest it may have also been a place of ceremony, possibly involving sound or even vibration. There's speculation, still unproven, that certain chambers echo in harmonic tones when filled with water. Was it a kind of ancient tuning space, a temple built to channel resonance? We don't know, but whoever designed it had an understanding of more than just stone and bricks. There's no mention of Dolavira in any known ancient text, no legend, no myth, just silence. It's as if history itself agreed to erase it, but why? Salt is a preservative. It can keep flesh from rotting, hold artifacts in a state of suspension for centuries, but it can also conceal. The Ran of Kutch floods with water during the monsoon and dries up again, forming a hard white crust. That natural cycle has hidden entire layers of archaeology for millennia. Every now and then, something pokes through, shards of tools, half-buried stones, even the ghost of a wall seen only when the light hits it just right. Some locals tell stories. They speak of a city swallowed by the earth after its people broke a sacred law. Others talk about a gate to another world, hidden beneath the salt. But none of these tales are written down. They're passed from elder to elder, always whispered, never shouted, and always with the same warning: don't dig too deep. Satellite imagery of the area shows patterns, lines that stretch in unnatural angles, hinting at structures far larger than Dolavira itself. Some researchers believe the city was only part of something much bigger, an entire network of settlements, now buried, waiting, but government access is limited, drones are sometimes restricted, and whenever new scans emerge, they often vanish from public archives not long after. So what are we looking at here? An ancient city, abandoned with no clear reason, technology that defies the expectations of its time, an undeciphered language, geometric planning that hints at lost knowledge, and a desert that seems determined to keep it all hidden. There are theories, of course. Some say it was a forgotten branch of the Indus civilization. Others suggest it was a trading hub for a lost seafaring people, now erased from the records. And then there are the fringe ideas, the ones that speak of advanced visitors, ancient memory keepers, or civilizations that lived alongside ours but stayed in the shadows. But maybe the truth is simpler, or stranger. Maybe there was once a people who built their city to be part of the land, not just resting on it but blending into it. Maybe they understood something we forgot about nature, balance and time, and when the world around them began to change, they didn't fight it, they listened, they left. And the desert, in its own quiet way, agreed to keep their secret. To this day, when the sun sets over the salt plains and the wind goes still, the ground seems to shimmer just a little more than usual. Some say if you close your eyes and press your ear to the earth, you can almost hear it, the soft hum of water running through dry stone, the echo of footsteps long vanished, and a whisper in a language no one remembers, and all it says is, "We were here, and we are not forgotten." The labyrinth beneath the Nile. There's a forgotten structure, buried beneath the sands of Egypt, one that's rarely spoken of in documentaries or history textbooks. It doesn't rise like a pyramid or stand boldly like a statue. Instead, it hides intentionally or by accident under layers of silt, sand, and time. And yet, according to ancient sources, it may have once been the single most astonishing monument in all of Egypt. Not a tomb, not a temple, but a labyrinth massive, mysterious, and nearly impossible to believe. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 2,500 years ago, described it as a wonder that surpassed even the pyramids. That's not a casual statement. He said it had 12 great courts, an upper structure with 3,000 rooms, and an equal number of rooms below the surface, another 3,000 chambers underground. These weren't ruins when he saw them, they were intact. Massive stone hallways stretched into the distance, walls covered with carvings, ceilings of single blocks of polished stone larger than anything used in the pyramids. And yet today, no one seems to know where it is. Some say it was a myth, a mistranslation, a story passed through too many hands. But others, including more recent explorers and even Egyptian archaeologists, believe they've already found it. The problem is that it's been buried again, and access has quietly been shut off. In 2008, a group of researchers using ground-penetrating radar surveyed an area just south of Hawara, near the pyramid of Pharaoh Amenemhat III. What they found was stunning, a massive rectangular anomaly beneath the surface, perfectly symmetrical and full of walls, corridors, and chambers. It matched Herodotus's description almost exactly. But shortly after the findings were published, the project was silenced. The radar data was pulled. No formal excavation followed. And to this day, visitors to the area are told there's nothing to see. So what was this labyrinth, and why would it be hidden? Some believe it was never meant to be a tomb or a palace. Instead, it may have served as a kind of ancient archive, a living record of Egypt's dynasties, knowledge, and sacred rituals. The walls, if Herodotus was right, were inscribed with every moment of Egyptian history known at the time. Not just victories and reigns, but astronomy, medicine, engineering, and perhaps even older records passed down from pre-dynastic cultures. But if that's true, then the implications are massive, because it would mean the greatest archive of ancient knowledge isn't stored in any museum, it's underground, sealed, ignored, and potentially erased from public memory. Some believe this structure was intentionally buried, that in a time of war, invasion, or political shift, Egyptian priests or rulers chose to hide their most precious records away. The underground chambers may have been flooded with silt from the nearby Bahr Yusuf Canal, either naturally or by design, and the upper levels, worn down by time, eventually collapsed inward. Over centuries, the labyrinth became part of the landscape, just another rise in the sand. But other theories go deeper. They suggest the labyrinth wasn't just a physical archive, that it had a different purpose altogether. In some esoteric Egyptian writings, there are references to sacred chambers beneath the earth, places where initiates would undergo trials, rooms of darkness, silence, and symbolic death, spaces designed to test the soul, not just protect knowledge. If the labyrinth served this purpose, then it wasn't just a building, it was a spiritual machine, a structure that shaped consciousness, not just stone. Imagine walking into a corridor that seems to loop on itself, no sound, no wind, just walls that echo your breath. The further you walk, the less you feel certain of direction or time. Was it used for meditation, for psychological transformation, or something else, something we no longer understand. If Herodotus was wrong, then it's just a story. But if he was right, then the greatest structure in Egypt may still be waiting beneath our feet. What's odd is how quickly the topic disappears from discussion. Researchers who speak about the labyrinth rarely gain traction. Videos are taken down, articles vanish, and while the region around Hawara remains accessible to tourists, the specific area where radar scans showed the anomaly is now off limits. There's no official excavation planned, no mention of it in government archaeology updates, just silence. There are also earlier accounts. Plouthe the Elder, Strabo, and even Diodorus Siculus all wrote about the labyrinth. And strangely, their descriptions are consistent. They describe a massive complex of rooms and halls, many of them underground, and always linked to the nearby pyramid of Amenemhat III. Some believe the pyramid itself may have been a symbolic key, a marker pointing to the true entrance of the labyrinth, which lies beneath and behind it. But the structure is too dangerous to explore now. It's cracked, eroded, and partially collapsed. The lower chambers are flooded, no official digs are taking place, and yet when you stand nearby, the ground feels different. It's flat, quiet, but not dead. Locals say the earth vibrates there sometimes. Animals avoid the area, and at night when the wind dies down, it's unnaturally still. A team in the 1920s, led by Flinders Petrie, documented parts of the upper structure. He believed he found the remains of columns and stone foundations, but even he concluded that the real structure had been buried long ago, and that what he found was only the surface, and he was never granted permission to dig further. So what's really down there? A forgotten monument to knowledge? An ancient test site for spiritual initiation? Or something older than Egypt itself? Something inherited from a civilization lost even to the pharaohs? There are patterns in ancient Egyptian art that suggest memory of something deep underground. The Duat, or underworld, is described in hieroglyphs as a maze, a place of gates and trials through which the soul must pass. Was this simply mythology? Or was it describing something real, something physical? Modern researchers have begged for permission to excavate the site again, but for now, all access remains blocked. It's not that the technology isn't available, it's not even that funding is the issue, it's simply not allowed. And that makes people wonder, what are they afraid we'll find? Imagine uncovering a room filled with stone tablets, older than the pyramids, describing a forgotten past. Imagine evidence that the dynastic Egyptians inherited knowledge rather than creating it from scratch. Imagine a chamber that rewrites history, not just of Egypt, but of human civilization. That's not science fiction. That's what's been described since the time of ancient Greece. And still, the desert waits. Quiet, endless, blinding. The labyrinth beneath the Nile remains untouched. Just a rumor to some, a whisper to others. But the radar scans are real. The writings are real. And the silence, that's real too. Someday, the sand will move, the earth will shift. And when it does, the stone halls beneath may once again see the light. Until then, they wait. Beneath layers of history, doubt, and secrecy. And if you stand there, just at the edge of the ruins, and listen closely when the wind dies down, you might hear it too, the echo of long corridors under your feet, and a door that's never been opened. The disappearance of the Ubar city, the Atlantis of the sands. Hidden beneath the burning deserts of southern Oman lies a story so strange, so tangled in both legend and archaeology, that even experts aren't sure where fact ends and myth begins. It's a place referred to in ancient texts as Ubar, a city so rich, so powerful, that it came to be known as the Atlantis of the sands. A city said to be swallowed by the desert overnight, never to be seen again. What really happened to Ubar? Was it a trade hub lost to time? Or did something darker cause its sudden disappearance? The earliest clues come from stories passed down over generations. According to Arab tradition, Ubar was a city built on top of vast reserves of wealth, especially frankincense, which was more valuable than gold at one time. Traders from Ubar would travel across the harsh desert routes, carrying precious cargo on camel caravans. The city became rich, almost unnaturally so, and then just like that, it was gone. What makes this strange is that this legend wasn't just a myth whispered in the shadows. The Quran mentions a people called the Iram of the Pillars, a reference many scholars link to the same mysterious civilization. According to the text, these people were proud, powerful, and deeply corrupt. So as the story goes, a divine punishment came upon them. The city collapsed into the earth. Buried, forgotten, for centuries, people assumed Ubar was a myth, a warning tale about arrogance and greed. But in the 1990s, something changed. A team of researchers backed by NASA satellite imaging decided to trace the ancient frankincense trade routes from space. Their goal was simple: find the lost paths used by traders more than 2,000 years ago. What they discovered stunned them. Hidden beneath the desert sands of Oman was an ancient crossroads, an intersection of caravan routes that all led to a single spot. And at that spot, they found the ruins of a settlement buried under sand and rock. Stone walls, collapsed towers, and what appeared to be the remains of a fortress. But the most disturbing discovery came later, when they realized part of the city had collapsed into a deep sinkhole, a sinkhole that seemed. The hole was wide, circular, and deep enough to swallow entire buildings. Around it, the ruins looked strangely intact, as if they'd been pulled inward all at once, not destroyed by slow erosion or battle. Some archaeologists suggested the ground beneath Ubar was made of limestone, which could easily dissolve and collapse if too much weight or moisture weakened it. But even then, why did it happen so suddenly, and why there? One theory suggests that Ubar's people had overused the land. By drawing water and digging deep wells for trade and survival, they may have weakened the very ground their city stood on. Over time, the limestone gave way, and the city literally fell into the earth. Another theory is less scientific and far more unsettling. Some researchers believe Ubar may have been destroyed on purpose, not by natural disaster or divine punishment, but by enemies. Competitors in the frankincense trade may have sabotaged the city's water systems or weakened its foundation with tools, causing the collapse. But this doesn't explain why there were no clear signs of battle, no fire damage, no weapons, no remains scattered in disarray, just silence, just sand. And that brings us to another mystery. Why was Ubar so hard to find for centuries? Unlike other ancient cities, its location was never clearly recorded. No maps marked it. Ancient texts mention it only in passing. Even satellite imagery had to be scanned in high resolution to see anything unusual. It's as if someone wanted it gone, truly erased. No ruins on the surface, no broken pottery above ground, just empty desert. The closer people looked, the stranger it became. One team that entered the sinkhole discovered cave systems and chambers that didn't align with the surface ruins. Some corridors led nowhere, others ended in sudden drops. One team reported the ground beneath them echoing strangely, as if the space was hollow or hiding something deeper below. Even today, the site is closed off in many areas. The Omani government declared the ruins a protected heritage site, and excavation has slowed almost to a stop. Locals believe the land is cursed, that strange things happen to those who dig too deep. There are reports of equipment failing without cause, of people getting lost in broad daylight among dunes that all look the same. Some even claim the sand itself moves at night, reshaping the area subtly, as if trying to hide what lies beneath. But is any of that true? We don't know. Some scientists argue that the so-called sinkhole was nothing more than a collapsed well. Others say the city wasn't Ubar at all, just a way station for trade. But that doesn't explain the references from so many ancient sources. It doesn't explain the strange structure of the ruins. And it definitely doesn't explain why modern scans show underground chambers that no one is allowed to explore. There's even speculation that Ubar predates recorded history. Some fringe researchers think it was one of many pre-Ice Age civilizations that existed long before dynastic Egypt or Mesopotamia. Civilizations that may have vanished not just due to war or disaster, but because of shifts in Earth's environment, cataclysms that wiped them out and buried their memory in myth. If that's the case, then Ubar wasn't just a trade hub, it was a surviving piece of an older world, an outpost of something even more ancient. And the reason it's so hard to find, so poorly understood, is because it doesn't fit into the current historical timeline. It shouldn't exist. And maybe that's the whole point. As the sun sets over the Omani desert, the wind sweeps across empty plains. No signs, no roads, just sand. Yet somewhere beneath those dunes lies the skeleton of a city. Its towers crumbled, its people forgotten, its name half erased by time, and still the desert holds it. Maybe the ground will open again someday, maybe it already has, and no one's talking. But one thing's certain, Ubar is real, its disappearance is real, and the silence that follows it, that part is the loudest of all. The subterranean maze of Derinkuyu, city beneath the earth. Imagine walking through a quiet town in central Turkey. The streets are calm, the houses simple. The air carries dust from the nearby Cappadocian valleys. Nothing about the surface prepares you for what's buried underneath. But then someone opens a trapdoor in their basement, and beneath that door is not a cellar, not a tunnel. It's a staircase leading down, far down, into a world carved entirely into volcanic rock. That world is called Derinkuyu, and it is not just ancient, it is almost unexplainable. This underground city, hidden beneath the town of Derinkuyu, wasn't discovered until 1963 by accident. A man renovating his home broke through a wall and found a passageway. That passage led to another and another, and soon archaeologists realized this wasn't a cave. It was a massive, multi-level city that stretched deeper and deeper into the earth. As they kept digging, they discovered something even stranger. This wasn't just a storage place, it was a place where people lived, thousands of them. Some estimates suggest Derinkuyu could have sheltered over 20,000 people, complete with their animals, food supplies, ventilation shafts, and even a school. That's right, someone, thousands of years ago, had carved an entire metropolis underground, complete with wells, churches, stables, communal kitchens, and stone doors that could be rolled into place from the inside, sealing out intruders. But here's the unsolved part. Who built it? When and how? Mainstream archaeologists believe the earliest parts may have been carved around the 8th or 7th century BCE by the Phrygians, but there's no inscription, no document, no name attached. Later civilizations, like the Byzantines and early Christians, may have used it, but even they spoke of it as a place that had been there long before. The rock of the region, called tuff, is soft enough to be carved by hand, but maintaining structural integrity while digging downward through multiple stories is incredibly difficult. And Derinkuyu doesn't just go 1 or 2 levels deep. It has 18 known levels, with only 8 currently open to the public. The rest, still being explored, or too dangerous. Each level was designed for function: bedrooms, wine cellars, food storage, meeting rooms. There are shafts to bring air down from the surface, and fresh water wells that reach aquifers deep below. If invaders came from above, residents could retreat down and roll massive circular stone doors into place, each weighing several hundred kilos. These doors could only be opened from the inside. But what kind of threat forces tens of thousands of people to live underground? Some believe Derinkuyu was used only during emergencies, during invasions or sieges. Others argue it was a permanent settlement for certain groups trying to escape something greater than war, perhaps religious persecution, climate disasters, or worse. Some even suggest that Derinkuyu was not carved by known ancient people at all, but inherited, passed down from a much older, forgotten civilization, one whose architectural knowledge vanished without record. The engineering is still unmatched. Even today, digging that deep without causing cave-ins requires advanced understanding of geology and ventilation. Yet here it is, silent, cool, perfectly preserved, a full city under the earth. As you descend through the narrow hallways, you notice something strange. Despite the tight turns and dim lighting, you never run out of air. That's because the ancient builders created more than 50 ventilation shafts spread across the structure. They circulate air naturally, moving cool drafts from one level to another. There's even a theory that these shafts were used to communicate between levels using sound, like ancient intercoms. There's another curiosity. Hidden passageways connect Derinkuyu to other underground cities miles away. It's part of an entire subterranean network across the region. Some of these tunnels are wide enough to walk through. Others are too narrow for anything but crawling. Who connected these cities? And for what purpose? No weapons were found. No signs of major battles. No mass graves. Just stone walls, carved with mathematical care and deliberate layout. Some researchers think the entire underground network was built as a last resort refuge against threats we no longer understand. Others suggest it was a planned, peaceful city, a utopia away from the dangers of surface life. Some fringe theories go further. They ask whether these ancient engineers were protecting themselves from environmental collapse or from something else entirely. Could Durinkyu be a remnant from a forgotten cataclysm, a bunker built in response to a solar flare, a climate shift, or even a passing cosmic event that drove ancient humans underground? No one knows. And that is what makes Durinkyu so haunting. You can visit it, you can descend into its depths, you can walk the same tunnels as people who lived there thousands of years ago, but you will never meet the ones who carved it. You won't find their names, you won't hear their stories. Only stone, only silence, and the feeling that someone, long before us, knew something we didn't. The unfinished obelisk, Egypt's gigantic abandoned puzzle. In the ancient city of Aswan, Egypt, sunlight warms the surface of a granite quarry that has been quiet for thousands of years. The walls are still marked by the tools of long-dead workers. Scattered stone fragments remain where they were dropped, and lying partially carved into the bedrock itself is something that defies explanation, not for what it became, but for what it never did. It's called the unfinished obelisk. Had it been completed, it would have stood over 137 feet tall. That's more than 40 meters, making it the largest known obelisk ever attempted in human history. And not only tall, but heavy, estimated to weigh nearly 1,200 tons. To put that in perspective, it's the weight of about 200 full-grown elephants, all carved from a single solid piece of granite, and yet for some reason it was never finished. Instead, the colossal obelisk lies on its side, half freed from the bedrock, still connected at the bottom. The workers just stopped, as if something forced them to abandon the project mid-strike. The mystery is not only about why they stopped, but how they even started. How did the ancient Egyptians plan to cut and move such a monstrous piece of stone? Even today, with advanced cranes and heavy machinery, lifting 1,200 tons would be almost impossible without breaking it, and moving it through the narrow streets of ancient Thebes or down the Nile. That would be an engineering challenge even for modern experts. So what were they thinking? Archaeologists believe the obelisk was commissioned during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, around 1500 BCE. She was one of Egypt's most powerful female pharaohs, known for her ambitious building projects and immense temples. The obelisk would have stood at Karnak, perhaps as a symbol of divine power reaching toward the heavens. But then, something went wrong. During the carving process, cracks formed in the granite. The massive monolith, still partially attached to the quarry floor, began to show signs of weakness. If lifted, it would likely split and fail, and so the workers abandoned it. Just like that, left in place for more than 3,500 years. But the bigger mystery still lingers. How were they carving it in the first place? Granite is an incredibly hard stone. It ranks about 6 or 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. To cut granite, you need tools that are harder than granite itself. Typically, materials like iron or bronze wouldn't be enough, and yet these were the tools available in ancient Egypt. So how did they do it? Some researchers say the workers used a process called pounding, where balls of dolerite, an even harder rock, were used like primitive hammers to break away pieces of granite bit by bit. They would pound the surface over and over, slowly wearing it down. But this method is extremely slow and labor-intensive. For a monument this size, it would have taken decades of constant labor. Others argue there had to be more advanced techniques, perhaps early forms of drilling, or controlled heating and cooling to crack the stone. But no definitive proof exists. And then there's the transportation question. Let's imagine for a moment that the obelisk was completed. It would have to be transported over land, possibly across desert terrain, then floated on the Nile River. But how do you move something that large without wheels, without cranes, and without modern hydraulics? Some suggest the Egyptians used sledges, wooden platforms dragged across lubricated sand. A wall painting even shows this technique in action. But that works for smaller stones. For a 1,200 ton obelisk, the friction alone would destroy the sledges or bury them. So were they just experimenting? Trying something new that never worked? Or were they replicating a method they once knew? something older, passed down from a forgotten era. The mystery deepens when you look at other obelisks from the same period. Many of them were completed. Some were successfully raised and still stand today in Egypt. Others were transported across the world to Rome, Paris, even New York. These are not small objects, and yet their original creators managed it. So why did this one fail? And more importantly, why attempt it at all if they knew the risks? Some alternative researchers speculate that the knowledge of working with stone at this scale came from a much earlier civilization, long lost to history. They believe the ancient Egyptians inherited certain technologies or methods from this earlier group. Perhaps they didn't fully understand how to replicate the process, which is why the unfinished obelisk failed. There are strange tool marks around the base, patterns that don't align with typical pounding or chiseling. Some describe them as smooth and even, as if machines were involved. Of course, that idea steps far outside mainstream archaeology, but the stone doesn't give away all its secrets. Even in its half-finished form, the obelisk is a monument to ancient ambition. You can walk beside it today. You can stand at its base and see the groove where workers tried to free it from the earth. You can touch the sides, still bearing the scars of the tools used to carve it, but you won't find the answers carved in hieroglyphs. You won't read a note explaining the failure. There is no record, no plan, no evidence of how it was meant to be raised. Only questions and silence. Why was it made? How far did they get before giving up? Did they plan to carve another somewhere else? Or was this the last attempt, a final monument in a dying age of grand stoneworks? The unfinished obelisk doesn't stand like the others. It doesn't tower over temples or point to the heavens. It lies flat like a sleeping giant, forgotten for centuries, only now being examined with modern eyes. And yet it might be one of the most important monuments ever created, not for what it achieved, but for what it reveals. It reminds us that even the greatest civilizations faced limits, that ambition sometimes outran ability, and that the past holds stories not only of triumphs but of failures that still speak to us. The forgotten code of the Ikum monoliths. In the dense tropical forests of southeastern Nigeria, near the banks of the Cross River, lies a field that has baffled archaeologists and researchers for decades. Scattered across the land are hundreds of ancient stone figures known as the Ikum monoliths. Each one stands tall and silent, carved with intricate symbols and faces that seem to whisper of a lost language, a forgotten people, and a purpose no one can fully decode. These monoliths, some reaching up to 6 feet in height, are thought to be over 1,000 years old. But even today, no one knows who carved them, why they were made, or what secrets they were meant to protect. The local people have lived with the monoliths for generations. To them, the stones are simply part of the landscape. Mysterious, yes, but no longer surprising. Yet, when researchers from around the world first encountered the Ikum monoliths, they were astonished by the complexity of the carvings. Each monolith displays a unique design. Some depict human faces with solemn expressions. Others show patterns that look like celestial maps or scripts. There are geometric shapes, abstract symbols, and arrangements that suggest a knowledge of mathematics or astronomy. And still, there is no known written language or oral history that directly explains their meaning. When early European explorers came across these monoliths during the colonial era, they assumed the stones were of relatively recent origin, but radiocarbon dating of the surrounding soil layers suggests they may be over 1,000 years old, possibly much older. That puts them in the same age range as other ancient civilizations that developed writing systems and complex societies. And yet in the case of the Ikum monoliths, there is no confirmed link to any known civilization. They stand alone, isolated from history, as if they came from a forgotten culture that vanished before it could be recorded. Some archaeologists have theorized that the monoliths were part of a spiritual or ceremonial site. Their alignment, for instance, may not be random. Some stones appear to be placed in specific patterns, as though they were tracking the movement of the sun, the moon, or even certain constellations. In ancient cultures, stone arrangements often played a role in religious rituals or seasonal ceremonies. Could the Ikum monoliths have served a similar function? Could they have marked times of planting and harvest, or perhaps honored ancestors whose names have been lost to time? Local legends offer little concrete insight. While the monoliths are respected, they are not worshipped. Some elders say they were created by the people before us, but no names are ever mentioned. Others believe the stones contain spirits or memories, frozen in time. But oral traditions in the region have gaps, and colonial disruptions erased many cultural records. What we're left with is a puzzle without clear instructions, a set of ancient artifacts that seem to speak a language no one alive can understand. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Ica monoliths is the possibility that they represent a form of proto-writing. The carvings, while not obviously alphabetic, do show repeated patterns that resemble symbols used in early scripts. Some researchers have tried to decode them, comparing them to ancient writing systems from Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley. So far, no match has been found. But what if the people who carved these stones were on the verge of developing a writing system unique to their culture, one that was never completed, or one that vanished when the society collapsed? Satellite imaging of the region has revealed that the monoliths are not scattered randomly. Clusters of stones appear to form shapes when viewed from above, shapes that resemble pathways, stars, or perhaps even human forms. This raises the possibility that the entire site may have been designed as a giant symbolic map, visible only from the sky. If so, what message was it meant to send, and to whom? Were the builders reaching out to the heavens, to future generations, or to something entirely unknown? Interestingly, the tools used to carve the stones remain unknown. The basalt material is extremely hard, and yet the engravings are precise, suggesting that the carvers had access to metal tools or techniques that could work with dense rock. But no such tools have ever been recovered from the area. This opens up another layer of mystery. How did these people who left no cities, no temples, no books, manage to create something so technically impressive? What skills did they possess, and why did they not leave behind more evidence of their civilization? In recent years, interest in the Ica monoliths has grown. Digital mapping projects, 3D scans, and detailed photographic analysis have started to build a database of the carvings, hoping that pattern recognition software or AI might identify recurring themes or hidden messages. Some scholars believe we may be approaching a time when the stones finally begin to speak to us, not through folklore or guesswork, but through data. Yet for now, the Ica monoliths remain silent. They stand in the jungle, slowly weathering under the weight of centuries. Tourists visit, researchers take notes, and locals continue their lives in the shadows of the stones. And through it all, the carvings hold their secrets. What makes this mystery so powerful is not just that we don't know the answers. It's that the questions themselves are so rich, so layered, so full of possibility. Who carved the Ica monoliths? Were they astronomers, priests? Were they trying to tell us something about the stars, the earth, or the human soul? Did they believe the stones could preserve memory or transmit knowledge across time? Or were they simply honoring their dead, capturing faces and stories before they faded? Whatever the truth is, we may never know it, but there is a strange comfort in that mystery. The Ica monoliths remind us that not all knowledge survives, not all stories are told. Sometimes the silence of the past is the message, a message that urges us to listen more closely, not just to the answers, but to the questions themselves. And as you imagine those ancient stones standing quietly under the canopy of trees, covered in moss and age, think about how many other places in the world may hold secrets just like this. Stories lost not because they were destroyed, but because no one thought to ask the right question in time. The Ica monoliths are not just an archaeological puzzle, they are an invitation, an open door to a world that once was, and a reminder that the past is not gone, it's just waiting to be remembered. The vanished wooden pyramid of Abydos. There's a curious silence in the heart of ancient Egypt, a silence not about what's there, but about what's missing. Among the sand-covered ruins of Abydos, one of Egypt's oldest and most sacred cities, archaeologists have long documented towering stone structures, tombs of forgotten kings, and ceremonial enclosures. But strangely, there are also references, scattered across old traveler logs, temple inscriptions, and even some rare papyrus fragments, to a structure that should not exist, a pyramid made entirely out of wood. Yes, wood. In a land defined by the permanence of limestone, granite, and sandstone, materials chosen to last thousands of years, the idea of constructing a pyramid, the symbol of eternity, out of a material as impermanent as wood sounds like nonsense. But the more you look into this forgotten story, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss. Let's take a quiet journey into the faded history of this anomaly, one that historians rarely talk about, not because they've disproved it, but because they simply don't know what to do with it. We begin in Abydos, roughly 500 kilometers south of Cairo. This was no ordinary settlement. It was believed to be the burial place of Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection. Pilgrims traveled here from all over Egypt, hoping to connect with the divine, and it was here during the First Dynasty that some of the earliest tombs of kings were placed. But then, during the 1800s, European explorers and early Egyptologists began documenting their findings here. Among them was a man named Wilhelm von Wessels, a quiet German scholar who kept meticulous handwritten notes. In his journals, now stored away in a university archive, he described something odd. He wrote of being led by local villagers to a small rise in the earth near the temple of Set I. They called it the Dead Hill, because according to their grandparents, that was where the wooden steps of the old pharaoh's tomb had once emerged from the sand. Wessels thought it was folklore until, while digging, he found a long wooden beam buried deep beneath the soil. The strange part, it was perfectly preserved. That kind of preservation was rare, especially for organic materials in that region. Even stranger was that the wood was cedar, a tree native to Lebanon. So how did large foreign timber beams end up buried in this sacred Egyptian city, in perfect alignment with the base of what would be pyramid dimensions? He measured the distances, and the layout seemed to match. Not a full-scale pyramid like Giza, but something much smaller. Perhaps a ceremonial structure. Or perhaps something forgotten on purpose. Because soon after Wessels began publishing early reports of his find, the excavation was shut down, the area was cordoned off, and nothing more was said about the wooden pyramid of Abydos. Fast forward to the 1930s, a different archaeologist, Margaret Benson, visited Abydos to study the Osirian, an underground temple believed to symbolize the tomb of Osiris. But she too noted something strange. In a letter to her sister, she described a hollow cavity behind the western ruins, which her guide said was once lined with sacred timber from foreign lands. She asked locals what they meant, and they repeated the same term, the steps of the wooden godhouse, a term not found in any known religious texts, but the idea that something sacred and wooden once stood here kept echoing. Then came the satellite age. In 2003, a remote sensing team from Italy used ground-penetrating radar around Abydos. While studying the grid layout, they detected a symmetrical void underground, not stone, not mud brick, but consistent with collapsed timber frames. They logged it, noted the geometry, and moved on, because to call it a pyramid would invite questions no one was prepared to answer. Why build a pyramid out of wood? Why here in Abydos? Was it some lost experiment from an early dynasty, or something symbolic? Could it have been a replica, a wooden model meant to serve a spiritual purpose, not a physical one? Some theories suggest it was an initiation site, that priests or chosen initiates would walk through this structure as a symbolic descent into death and rebirth. Much like Osiris himself, the fragile wooden steps may have represented the impermanence of human life. Unlike the stone pyramids that reach toward the sky, this one may have faced downward into the earth, into the mysteries. And there's something else. Old Nubian tales passed down through oral history talk of a house of bone and bark, where the dead were taught to walk as gods. One researcher in the 1980s suggested this might refer to Abydos and the wooden structure within it. But again, no one followed up. Why does this story keep disappearing? Some whisper that the wooden pyramid may have been tied to forbidden knowledge, something the early priesthood decided to bury, perhaps a failed religious idea, or perhaps it held beliefs that conflicted with the later state-sponsored version of the afterlife. We'll never know, because no official excavation of the wooden pyramid has ever been publicly conducted. The site remains off-limits. Yet the traces remain, the aligned cedar beams, the symmetrical underground patterns, the repeating local stories, the isolated journal entries from travelers who had no reason to lie. They point to a structure that once stood proudly, and then vanished, not from decay, but from deliberate erasure. And maybe that's what makes this one of the most compelling unsolved mysteries in ancient Egypt. It's not just that something strange might have existed, it's that it was made to be forgotten, a mystery that was silenced. But now, slowly, it's resurfacing, piece by piece. And somewhere, beneath the quiet sands of Abydos, the wooden memory of a vanished pyramid still waits, a structure built not to last forever, but to be remembered by those curious enough to look deeper. The cradle beneath the ice, secrets of the buried Antarctic ruins. Far beyond where the sun reaches, past the southernmost waves of any map we follow, there lies a continent that was never meant to be touched, Antarctica. We know it today as a frozen desert, endless snow, temperatures that can kill in minutes, winds so sharp they can slice through layered gear. But beneath that ancient sheet of ice, 2 miles thick in places, there's something else. Not just rock, not just fossils, but something built. And what has stunned explorers, scientists, and classified operatives for over a century is the persistent whisper, threaded through old maps, military cables, and unexplainable satellite images, that someone may have lived there long before the ice came, that Antarctica may have once been the cradle for a lost civilization, long before recorded history even began. Let's go slowly. You might think the idea is modern, but the first spark comes from ancient maps. The most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by a Turkish admiral who claimed he compiled it from much older sources. And what it shows in shocking accuracy is the northern coastline of Antarctica, not as we see it today, but as it would appear ice-free. Here's the curious part. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and the first scientific ice-penetrating radar, which could view land beneath the glaciers, didn't exist until the late 20th century. Yet somehow this 1513 map matches modern sonar data of the underlying rock formations almost perfectly. So where did Admiral Piri Reis get this information? He wrote that his sources included maps from the ancient world. Some suggest those sources came from the Library of Alexandria, or even older civilizations that we've forgotten entirely. This leads us to a powerful, curiosity-filled question. If Antarctica was once ice-free, could it have been inhabited? Now, scientifically, it's not as far-fetched as it seems. In 2009, scientists drilled deep into the Antarctic ice and discovered pollen, freshwater diatoms, and even signs of forest growth. These were not surface contaminants. They were entombed beneath layers of ancient glacial buildup. What this tells us is clear. Antarctica wasn't always frozen. Around 20 million years ago, it was lush. Even more recently, there are signs that parts of the continent may have been ice-free less than 6,000 years ago, within the window of early human civilizations. But here's where it gets darker. In the 1990s, a US research expedition documented strange magnetic anomalies beneath the ice sheet. Initially thought to be volcanic in origin, further radar imaging showed a perfectly geometric formation, one that resembled a massive hexagonal structure buried deep near the Gamburtsev Mountains. One of the researchers on that mission, after retiring, spoke anonymously to a small radio station. He claimed that the data was classified almost immediately, and their camp was shut down by a joint military scientific order. He believed they had found something artificial. Around the same time, the US Navy began conducting strange flight operations over the same area, despite there being no strategic reason to do so. Former pilot logs obtained under Freedom of Information requests revealed that certain coordinates in Antarctica were marked restricted airspace without any public explanation. But even earlier, during Operation High Jump in 1946, the US sent a massive military fleet to Antarctica under the command of Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, it was a research mission. But the sheer scale, over 4,000 men, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and military planes, didn't match any scientific precedent. Admiral Byrd later gave a curious interview in Chile, claiming that what they encountered in Antarctica was beyond anything they were prepared for. He said there were flying machines that could travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds. His words were never broadcast again. Now, was he referring to enemy craft? Or was he speaking in veiled language about something much older? Something not of our world or of our known history? More recently, high-resolution satellite images leaked online show what appear to be triangular entrances carved into the ice cliffs of Queen Maud Land. Some analysts say they're natural formations, but others suggest these may be sealed entrances. Some show strange shadows inside, perfectly aligned, artificial angles, and one thing we've learned from archaeology over the years is this: nature rarely builds in perfect triangles or squares. A few daring researchers, fringe though they may be, believe there's an ancient structure buried beneath the ice, larger than the Great Pyramid, possibly an ancient city, frozen in time. They call it the Black Spire. No official expedition has been allowed to explore the area. Interestingly, a few whistleblowers from global research stations in Antarctica have hinted at being reassigned or silenced after asking the wrong questions. Some say they witnessed construction teams under military guard digging beneath areas that were supposedly protected for climate studies, yet no published results ever came from those digs. And this leads to an even bigger mystery: why the secrecy? If there's nothing beneath the ice but rock and history, why guard it so fiercely? Why seal off certain areas to even fellow scientists? Why classify weather station data and radar scans? Could it be that Antarctica hides not just environmental secrets, but historical ones? Some researchers propose a bold idea that during a past pole shift, Antarctica was in a temperate zone, and in that forgotten time, a now extinct civilization lived there. A seafaring people, builders, possibly the ones whose knowledge seeded the early myths of Atlantis. And when the shift came, sudden, cataclysmic, it buried everything in miles of snow and ice, preserving it like a frozen time capsule. We can't drill through 2 miles of ice on a whim, but if we ever do, if those efforts that have been quietly happening behind closed doors are someday revealed, we may find structures, tools, maybe even writings untouched by erosion, intact, waiting. Until then, we're left with half maps, silent stories, restricted coordinates, and questions that only grow louder in the cold. So the next time you glance at that white stretch at the bottom of the globe, don't just see snow. Imagine what lies beneath it: an entire city, maybe a people, maybe the forgotten architects of our earliest myths, buried, preserved, hidden by time and ice and silence, waiting for the world to remember. The cave that shouldn't exist. Secrets of the immovable door. Somewhere in the hills of Central Asia, on the edge of the known Silk Road trade routes, there's a story about a cave. No markings outside, no temple nearby, just a cliff face weathered by time and almost forgotten, but the real mystery begins once you step inside. According to a declassified Soviet field report from the late 1950s, a small geological team was dispatched to a region of the Altai Mountains to survey for mineral deposits. During their trek, they stumbled upon what looked like a natural rock overhang, but when one of them stepped closer, the ground vibrated. They entered. What they found inside wasn't a cave. It was a corridor. Smooth walls, flat floor, like it had been cut, not by hand but by a machine, a tool that shouldn't have existed. But here's where it gets truly strange. Just 20 meters in, they came to a door. Not a stone slab, not wooden panels, a perfect metallic rectangle, embedded flush with the rock. No handle, no hinge, no seam, just a cold surface that didn't reflect their light the way anything else in the chamber did. They tried to mark it. Metal tools scratched nothing. Hammer strikes bounced off with no sound. It was as if the material absorbed force and light entirely. Then, the vibrations returned, faint, like a hum from deep beneath the earth. Not mechanical, not natural, rhythmic. The door didn't open, it didn't move, but the geologist reported that for just a moment, they could hear a pulse, not with their ears, but in their bones. They left. The report was filed, and then it disappeared from public records for nearly 40 years. So what was this cave? And more importantly, who built that door? Let's rewind. Across several ancient cultures, from Sumer to Mongolia, there are legends about the sleeping watchers, beings who built halls beneath the earth, not to live in but to seal something inside. The texts describe silent doors, made of metal that sings, which could only be opened by the right vibration, not by hand. The story was always considered myth, until that Soviet report resurfaced. The location, still undisclosed. But through leaked coordinates and later satellite images, some believe the entrance lies near the Yukok Plateau, a remote area filled with burial mounds and unexplained megaliths. Even in ancient Chinese records, this area was called the Gate of Ghosts, a place travelers were warned never to cross after sundown. Some explorers have tried. One American climber claimed in a forum post in 2007 that he reached a forbidden cave in the Altai, guided by a local nomad. He posted just once, shared a photo of what looked like a straight-cut corridor descending into darkness. He wrote only one line: "The door hums louder the closer you get. No animals go near it." He never posted again. Skeptics argue this is all a misinterpretation, maybe some odd mineral formation, maybe a Soviet bunker. But if that were true, why are modern expeditions consistently denied permits to explore the area? Why do locals refer to it only as the Mountain of the Sleeping Stone? Here's another clue. In 2012, an earthquake near the same region caused a landslide. Remote sensors picked up a strange EM pulse from underground, lasting just 17 seconds. It didn't match tectonic activity. Some researchers believe it originated from a buried structure, one with power, some kind of signal. We're left with only questions. Why would someone or something go through the effort to carve a corridor into solid stone, install a seamless, indestructible door, and then leave it there untouched, hidden for who knows how many centuries, or millennia? Was it meant to keep people out, or to keep something in? The hum, the vibrations, the lack of response to any modern tools. Some theorists believe the door isn't meant to open in our time, that it's time-locked, only meant to react to environmental triggers like magnetic shifts or planetary alignment. Others, more speculative still, believe it's not a door in the traditional sense at all. They suggest it's a dimensional seal, a locked point between realities, something we cannot even begin to understand with our current technology. And the hum, perhaps not a sound, but a warning. There are more questions. Why is the corridor built underground, in a place where no known ancient culture had the tools to dig straight and smooth into granite? Why has no local folklore ever mentioned people entering the door, only fleeing from it? And why are there reports of animals refusing to go near the entrance, turning away in panic, as if sensing something humans can't? We know that animals sometimes react to earthquakes before they happen. Could they be sensing something deeper, older, unnatural? A sealed door is not just a barrier, it's a message. It says someone knew what was behind it. It says someone believed it should stay closed. And it raises a final, unsettling thought. What if one day the hum stops? What if the vibrations slow and the door responds, not to us but to something returning? Until then, the cave waits, silent, buried in rock and time. The door that does not open, a monument not to memory but to mystery, hidden, humming, and still, beneath the sleeping stone. The vanishing map of the ice wall city. In a government archive in Stockholm, there's a single document kept in a climate-controlled drawer. It's a map, faded, torn, and partially burned, but still legible. And unlike any map ever made of Earth, this ancient parchment doesn't show continents or oceans as we know them. Instead, it shows walls of ice, miles high, surrounding a massive central land, divided into geometric sections with symbols that don't match any known civilization. It's labeled only in Old Norse, with a handwritten note, carved over by en som ble glemt, map of the city that was forgotten. No one knows who drew it. It has no date, no creator's name. And yet carbon testing places the paper's origin somewhere in the early 1400s. But the ink was made with chemicals not used in Europe until centuries later. It should not exist. And yet, it does. This map wasn't discovered by an explorer or historian. It was found in 1977, wedged behind a false panel inside a wooden cabinet donated to the university. The cabinet had been used for law records, but inside, hidden behind layers of forgotten folders, was this single map, rolled and sealed with a wax emblem, a six-pointed snowflake within a circle. And what it shows is impossible. At the center of the map is a city made of hexagons, perfect tessellating districts, roads laid out in spirals, a central tower taller than anything built in medieval Europe, marked with a sun that never sets. Surrounding this city is what appears to be a wall of sheer ice, not just mountains, but massive vertical cliffs of frozen terrain. And beyond that wall, nothing, or perhaps everything. The outer edges of the map contain hundreds of tiny notations in a language no one can read. Not Latin, not Norse runes, not Greek. Experts tried to decode it for years, believing it might be an invented cipher or a lost dialect. But the symbols change slightly each time they repeat, like a living script that's always in motion. And then there's the temperature. When the map is unsealed from its drawer for study, the surrounding air cools by 2 degrees. Every time. Not dramatically, but consistently. One researcher thought the paper might be releasing old air trapped in its fibers, but lab tests found no chemical cause. It simply makes the room colder, like it remembers the place it came from. Where could a city surrounded by an ice wall have existed? There are legends in nearly every culture about lost polar civilizations. The Sumerians wrote of a land in the far north where the air was thin and the ground shined like glass. The Mayans told stories of a sunlit place where snow never melted. The Norse sagas speak of Utgardar, the outlands beyond the edge of the world, where a forgotten race built cities from ice and starlight, but those were just myths until this map appeared. Geographers have tried to overlay the map's layout onto modern satellite images of Antarctica. While most of it doesn't align, one region in East Antarctica matches the map's curvature with eerie accuracy, a circular depression, 400 kilometers wide, hidden beneath the ice sheet. It was previously dismissed as a natural basin, but the map shows it as a city, a perfectly aligned, geometrically structured city. And then the strange part, the map vanished from public access in 1989. It was last shown during a closed-door academic symposium. After that, it was moved from the university archive to a private storage facility operated by a multinational museum trust. The public was told the document had deteriorated beyond preservation, but an anonymous former employee claimed it had been taken, not stored, sealed inside a vault where ice could not melt. Since then, 3 supposed copies of the map have surfaced online, all of them quickly debunked. The real one has not been seen in decades, and yet every so often someone new claims to have seen the original. Always the same story, that the city on the map was not made for humans, that the ice wasn't a barrier, it was protection, and that when the ice finally breaks, what's inside will return. The deeper mystery isn't just who made the map, it's why someone tried so hard to hide it. The tomb that sealed itself shut. In 1907, deep in the deserts of the Valley of the Kings, a team of archaeologists discovered a tomb that had no right to exist. It wasn't listed in any ancient records. No scrolls, no temple mentions, no myths, but there it was, cut straight into the limestone wall of a narrow canyon, hidden behind a rockfall that looked undisturbed for thousands of years. At first they thought it was just a natural crevice, but when they cleared the rocks, they uncovered a perfectly smooth doorway. No carvings, no royal seal, just a single circular stone placed precisely in the center of the door, like a keyhole, but no key. When they finally managed to open the tomb, using levers and pulleys to force the slab loose, they were met with something strange. The air that escaped was warm, not stale, not cool like most ancient tombs. It was as if someone had just been inside, and the scent wasn't one of decay or dust. It was sweet, almost like perfume. Inside, the tomb was shockingly simple. Just a single chamber, square, no columns, but the walls were unlike anything seen in Egypt before. Not covered in hieroglyphs, but in lines of code-like etchings, precise and repetitive, wrapping around the entire room in a spiral pattern. Thousands of symbols, carved into polished basalt, and at the center, lying on a stone slab, was a body, but not mummified. The figure was covered in a strange metallic fabric, thin as silk but stronger than copper wire. The face was obscured by a mask made of a material no one could identify, smooth like glass, but black, reflective, and cold to the touch. And here's the part that kept researchers up at night. The mask was sealed onto the skin. No seam, no clasp, as if it had grown there. The team photographed everything, documented each symbol, sent samples to laboratories in Cairo, Berlin, and Paris. But within 3 days, the tomb closed itself. No joke, no exaggeration. They returned to find the massive stone door back in place. No footprints, no sand disturbance, no human activity, as if the entire thing had never been touched. They assumed it was sabotage, that someone had sealed it to protect the site, but when they tried to open it again, the doorway wouldn't budge. not even with industrial tools. It was fused, as if the stone had melted and re-solidified, perfectly flush. And then, the photographs started to vanish. The team's negatives, blank. The images developed in Cairo, corrupted. The ones sent to Berlin, lost in a warehouse fire. Paris, the courier never made it. 4 different archives, all gone. Only a single sketch remains, drawn by one of the archaeologists from memory. It shows a humanoid figure, not Egyptian, not African, tall, thin, wearing a tight suit with segmented lines, and eyes, enormous eyes like lenses. By 1909, the tomb's location was quietly erased from official records. The lead archaeologist left Egypt and never returned. When asked in an interview why he abandoned the dig, he replied with one line: "Some tombs are sealed for a reason." The tomb doesn't appear on any modern satellite images of the Valley of the Kings, not because it isn't there, but because the area around it has been digitally blurred. No explanation, no oversight committee, just a quiet black box on the map. And no, Google didn't do it. The blur exists on independent satellite systems as well. There's a theory now that the tomb wasn't Egyptian at all, that the symbols weren't religious but technological, that the body inside wasn't ancient but preserved. Some believe the tomb was never meant to be found, that it activates when disturbed, that the stone ceiling wasn't a booby trap but an automatic response, a system that still works thousands of years later. A handful of researchers have spent their lives trying to relocate it, following vague notes, comparing journals, even bribing local workers, but every expedition has failed. The rockfall that once revealed the door has been reclaimed by time, covered over, erased by wind and heat. Some even question whether the tomb was real, but too many people witnessed it. Too many accounts match. The sketch, the symbol etchings, the mask, the air, the sudden heat. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hoax. It was a message, not from the gods, not from the pharaohs, but from someone else, someone who wanted to be left alone and sealed their chamber with a defense system we still don't understand. The silent chambers beneath Çatalhöyük. Buried beneath layers of soil in what is now central Turkey lies one of the oldest known cities in human history, Çatalhöyük. At first glance it looks like a clustered hill, just a series of mud brick homes stacked together like beehives. But the deeper you dig, literally and figuratively, the more strange it becomes. The people of Çatalhöyük lived over 9,000 years ago. No streets, no doors, just roof entrances. Homes were built tightly against one another. To move through the city, you had to climb across rooftops. That alone is strange, but it's only the surface. Beneath the dwellings, archaeologists began discovering something that didn't belong: rooms, sealed chambers, hidden spaces not connected to any of the homes above, perfectly enclosed. Some of them contained bones, yes, but arranged in bizarre ritualistic patterns: skull circles, femur lines, carefully placed hands facing one direction. There were no signs of flooding, collapse, or reuse. These weren't storage rooms or burial pits. These were purposefully created underground spaces, with perfectly plastered walls, painted symbols, and complete silence. No one can explain why. Each chamber had its own energy. Some were warm, others were cold to the touch. One of them had a floor that reacted to sound. When a voice echoed, the plastered walls would hum, low, almost like a distant growl. When audio sensors were used, strange frequencies were recorded. Frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, but not zero. Even stranger, some of the symbols painted on the chamber walls do not match anything in known Neolithic art. There are spirals, yes, and abstract figures, but some look like stars. Others resemble electrical circuitry. One particular chamber has a symbol that appears to be a cross-section of a human brain, drawn thousands of years before anatomical knowledge was thought to exist. In 2012, a new chamber was uncovered, fully intact. The moment they broke the seal, something happened. Equipment started glitching. Batteries drained instantly. Flashlights refused to turn on, even with new cells. Researchers described a physical heaviness, as if the air inside pressed against them like a weight. And the oddest part, a quiet rhythmic vibration, like breathing, not wind, not seismic, a steady inhale and exhale, pulsing from the walls. They halted excavation for months. Some theorized it was built for sound resonance, an early acoustic experiment, but others believe the chamber isn't just old, it's ancient, far older than Catalhuyuk itself, and that the city was built around it, as if its builders found the chamber first and then settled nearby to protect or worship it. None of the tombs in the area match its construction. The plaster is finer, the angles sharper, the materials harder, more durable. Some even suspect the plaster isn't natural at all. When analyzed, it shows traces of synthetic compounds not found elsewhere in the settlement or in any known Neolithic site. There's no writing, no explanations, but the pattern is always the same. Each hidden chamber is sealed with a method that doesn't match the architecture of the rest of the city, decorated with symbols not present in nearby homes, found only beneath certain parts of Catalhuyuk, never randomly. And some researchers are beginning to believe the city wasn't a city at all, that it was a shell, a decoy, a way to mask what was beneath. Imagine this, a civilization that discovers a structure underground, something they don't understand, but they feel its power. They don't destroy it, they don't move it, they build above it, around it, maybe even dedicate their entire culture to understanding it, or protecting it. Maybe these chambers were entry points, or old machines, or remnants of a much earlier people who vanished long before the Neolithic farmers ever appeared. And maybe those original builders left something behind, something still active, because sensors placed inside the deepest chamber still record changes, tiny fluctuations in temperature, brief electromagnetic pulses, faint audio spikes that rise and fall like a heartbeat, all beneath a city that had no streets, no rulers, and no written language. And when you step back, Catalhuyuk feels less like a village and more like a cloaked installation, one that someone, or something, was trying to keep buried. And even after decades of research, we still don't know who sealed those chambers or why they pulse like living things. But whatever it is, it has remained undisturbed for over 9,000 years, waiting. The Forbidden Observatory beneath the Andes. High in the Andes Mountains of South America, past the common tourist paths and well-known ruins, there's a region where ancient stone paths vanish into fog, where clouds gather low and thick, and where even locals hesitate to go. Deep in this landscape, nearly swallowed by earth and silence, is a forgotten site that only a handful of archaeologists have dared to explore. It isn't marked on most maps, it isn't talked about in history books, but those who've seen it in person call it the Forbidden Observatory, not because of what it looks like, but because of what it seems to do. The site, discovered accidentally in the early 2000s by a pair of anthropologists searching for pre-Incan cave art, was hidden beneath layers of moss, collapsed stone, and volcanic soil. At first it appeared to be a collapsed shelter, but as excavation began, they uncovered an entrance shaft, narrow, stone-lined, and strangely smooth. Unlike anything built by the Inca or even the Wari before them, descending into the structure required ropes. The walls were tight, the air changed, it became dry, stale, the kind of air that hadn't been disturbed in 1,000 years. At the bottom of the shaft they entered a chamber, then another, then 3 more, each one circular, each one aligned in a perfect geometric grid. But here's where it becomes something else entirely. The floors were polished stone, not carved but melted smooth. Some had markings, circular grooves, not unlike clock faces. In the center of the largest chamber was a raised platform, not wide, not ceremonial, just high enough to stand on. And directly above it, cut through 20 meters of solid rock, was a narrow tunnel to the open sky. That tunnel pointed at nothing, except during one very specific moment. At exactly 3:33 a.m., twice a year, during the equinoxes, a thin beam of starlight cuts through the opening and touches the platform dead center. The light remains there for 33 seconds, then vanishes. This alone wouldn't be so strange. Ancient cultures aligned buildings with the stars all the time. But here's the difference. This structure wasn't built using known methods. There are no tool marks, no joints, no signs of chisels or carving techniques. The rock appears to have been shaped by heat, not fire, not friction, but something else. Something that softened the stone uniformly, and left behind surfaces that are still reflective after thousands of years. And then there's the sound. In the deepest chamber, even a whisper echoes with unnatural clarity. When you speak aloud, the sound bounces and loops, not off the walls but through the walls, like the stone is alive with vibration. Instruments brought inside registered acoustic patterns that didn't match natural resonance. These weren't echoes, they were tones. Some speculate the chambers were used for communicating with the stars. Others believe the sounds are messages that come from the stars. What makes this even stranger is the lack of artifacts. No pottery, no bones, no tools, no signs of daily life. Whoever used this place didn't live here. They came here for one purpose and left, and then they covered it up, buried it, sealed it. Local legends speak of a place in the mountains where time bends, where light moves strangely, where dreams change when you sleep too close. Some old Quechua stories even refer to a doorway to the sky that no man may walk through twice. The few researchers who stayed near the observatory long-term reported changes in sleep patterns, vivid, repeating dreams. Many of them dreamt of standing on the central platform, looking up, unable to move, while a slow voice counted numbers in a language they couldn't understand. When sleep studies were conducted nearby, brain scans showed synchronized theta waves among people sleeping in different tents without ever hearing each other's dreams. And one of the most unsettling observations, the structure seems to be responding. Weather instruments near the observatory showed irregular magnetic activity. Not steady, not natural. It spikes slightly when people approach the central chamber. It pulses slightly when people speak, and every equinox the same strange pattern repeats. The light enters, the vibration rises slightly, and then stops again. The region has been closed off multiple times by local governments. Some say it's for safety, landslides, erosion. Others whisper of outside interference, international researchers who took samples but never published their findings. One theory suggests the observatory is not actually Andean at all, that it predates known cultures, that it was uncovered by ancient people, used briefly, and then abandoned again, because it was never meant to be understood, or even touched, and that maybe, just maybe, the light it points toward isn't sunlight or starlight, but something else, something that only arrives twice a year, for 33 seconds, while the mountain listens, and waits. The Vault of the 13 Silent Kings. There is a place spoken of in whispers among old cartographers and obscure historians. A site said to be hidden not in plain sight but in the folds between known regions, between forgotten borders and erased kingdoms. It is not marked on modern maps, it never was. Those who speak of it at all call it the Vault of the 13 Silent Kings, and no one agrees on where it is. Some claim it lies buried beneath a salt flat in Central Asia, where the land turns white and compasses spin in slow circles. Others say it hides in the dense mountain woods between the Black Sea and the Caspian, behind a cave sealed with volcanic glass. But every version agrees on one thing: the vault does exist, and it was sealed for a reason. The first references to it come not from one civilization, but 3 Sumerian clay tablets, early Persian inscriptions, and pre-Hellenic trade symbols. All mention a site where the ones who do not speak were buried. Not because they were criminals, but because they knew too much. They were called kings, but not because they ruled. They were kings of observation, of memory, of knowledge that no one else was allowed to carry. One of the most chilling clues comes from an Akkadian cylinder scroll, discovered in 1932, but never displayed publicly. It contains a diagram of concentric circles, 13 chambers, and the phrase, "They were sealed so the stars would not listen." That's a strange phrase. The stars would not listen. It implies the opposite of what we expect, that these kings weren't trying to communicate with something out there, they were hiding from it. Archaeological documents linked to the scrolls speak of the kings as living indexes. Each was said to hold within their mind a single aspect of forbidden knowledge, not myths, not stories, but calculations, measurements, star charts, numbers that describe shapes not found in this world. Why would that be dangerous? Because when the knowledge was combined, it allowed something to be summoned. Some texts describe it as an alignment, others refer to it as the long pulse. But whatever it was, the moment the kings spoke their knowledge in unison, something heard and responded. That was over 7,000 years ago, and according to every legend, they never spoke again. They were taken to the edge of the world, wherever that meant at the time, and sealed inside a vault with no doors, no surface entrances, no map, and no written record of the full event. Each culture that mentions it describes a group that tried to find the vault. Each story ends with silence. In 1997, a Russian satellite scanning underground anomalies in Central Asia detected a structure beneath the salt crust of a now evaporated lake. It wasn't natural. It had angles, symmetry, a geometric depth not consistent with erosion or fault collapse. When a small research team was flown in under the guise of a geothermal study, they found an entry shaft, not wide enough for machines, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. They lowered sensors, then lights, then sound detectors. The audio came back strange, not noise, but stillness. Flat, no echo, no depth. That's not what you expect from a stone vault. It's what you expect from perfect insulation. Eventually, one researcher descended. He was never the same. In a debriefed report later leaked to a private archaeology journal, he wrote this: "The chambers are real. 13. Precisely 13. Each is shaped like a hexagon, carved from seamless black stone. The walls seem to absorb light, not reflect it. They are not smooth, they are engraved." But when he was asked to reproduce the engravings, he couldn't. Not because he forgot, but because he physically couldn't draw them. Every time he tried, his hand trembled, the lines came out wrong, as if his mind knew the shapes but something prevented translation. Later scans of his brain showed no damage, but he suffered from recurring episodes of silence, literal silence. He would stop hearing for hours, even though nothing was wrong with his ears. Eventually, he stopped speaking altogether. Some say he joined the 13, not literally, but that his mind became a carrier of the same knowledge. Others say the knowledge began leaking again, and that's why strange satellite signals began appearing above that region. In 2011, a NATO report mentioned a brief radio burst that originated from deep beneath the Earth's crust near that exact area. It wasn't geological, it wasn't seismic, it was a structured pulse, 13 short signals, followed by one long one. The frequency, 3.3333 megahertz, a number that has appeared in several unrelated ancient carvings around the world, including the island of Sardinia, the Nazca lines in Peru, and a buried obelisk in Sudan. None of these cultures had contact, but they all left behind 13-pointed star symbols, and in some cases, maps pointing away from civilization toward desolate places where no settlements were built. Even more disturbing, the vault was never just a myth, it was a warning. The 13 kings were not placed there because they were powerful, they were sealed because they were remembering something we were all supposed to forget, and now that memory is waking up. Some independent researchers claim that the vault is not even underground anymore, that it shifted, that it moved beneath the ocean. Others say it was only ever partially physical, that the real vault exists in a state between space and time, and the chambers are echoes of events that haven't happened yet, that they hold information from the future. That's why the knowledge causes madness, because the human mind isn't meant to remember what hasn't happened yet. But the 13 kings could, and still can, because they never died. Not in the traditional sense. The vault is not their tomb, it's their container, and the seal is wearing thin. You might wonder, if this was truly dangerous, wouldn't someone have destroyed it? Maybe they tried. Maybe that's why some ancient cultures vanished without a trace, and maybe that's why some things are still missing from history, not because they were lost, but because they were removed to stop us from opening the vault too soon, or worse, rebuilding it. The city that moved without a trace. There are ruins in the Bolivian highlands that make no sense. They sit 13,000 feet above sea level, high enough to make breathing difficult, with freezing temperatures most of the year, and no nearby rivers, forests, or fertile soil to support life. And yet someone built a city there, not just shelters, massive stone platforms, complex irrigation lines, foundations that stretch wider than football fields, giant blocks of granite and andesite, some weighing over 100 tons, carved with interlocking precision you don't see again until modern architecture. It's called Pumapunku, and no one knows who built it. Archaeologists say the site is at least 1,500 years old. Some say more like 10,000, but even the earliest cultures in that area, the Tawanaku, say the city was already there when they arrived. The local legends don't claim to have built it. They say it was the gods. But here's the part that really confuses scientists. What happened to it? Because unlike most ancient cities which are abandoned gradually, where people leave over time, this one shows no signs of that, no burn marks, no signs of war, no famine, no mass graves. Instead, it looks like everyone just vanished overnight. Even stranger, some of the stone blocks look like they were in the middle of being installed. Half-carved notches, channels started but never finished, a slab raised but not placed. It's like someone hit pause on construction, forever, and there's no quarry nearby. The stones, massive ones, came from over 50 miles away, across rough mountainous terrain. No wheels, no pack animals, no cranes. So how did they get there? One theory is that they didn't, that the entire city was moved. Let that sink in. Not built where it sits, but moved after being constructed somewhere else. And it's not as impossible as it sounds, because the way the stones fit together, it's too perfect. Not just close, but laser tight. No mortar, just geometry. Some of the angles are so clean, modern engineers have struggled to replicate them even with advanced tools, which leads to a controversial theory, banned from many universities and rejected by mainstream archaeology, that Pumapunku was originally a portable city, not like tents or mobile homes, but a civilization that engineered architecture to be disassembled, transported, and reassembled as needed, like a traveling fortress, and they were experts at it. They designed modular stone blocks that locked together like 3D puzzle pieces, each one part of a larger mechanical structure, able to withstand earthquakes, floods, even time. And then, one day, they just moved it all. But why? Where would an entire city go? There are two possibilities. One, they migrated and rebuilt it somewhere else, but we haven't found the new site yet. Or two, they moved the city out of reach, not just away, but out of time. See, some fringe researchers believe the carvings found at Pumapunku contain not just artwork, but instructions, schematics, a kind of blueprint, not for how to build, but how to transcend, symbols that match patterns found in only one other place in the world, Göbekli Tepe, thousands of miles away in Turkey. Another ancient site with unknown builders, and mysterious pillars that point not just to stars, but to events that hadn't happened yet when they were built. Both sites share one strange element, circular enclosures with precise alignments and stone markers that suggest movement, not of people, but of structures. And then there's the missing metal, because at Pumapunku, archaeologists discovered something incredible, tiny copper clamps. These clamps weren't decorative, they held massive stones together, and the grooves where they fit are still visible. But all the clamps are gone, removed cleanly, no damage, as if someone came back just to take them. Why? Because some believe the clamps weren't just mechanical, they were magnetic, or conductive, used to channel something, electricity, vibration, resonance, not to power the city, but to shift it, to change its location in ways we don't understand. And here's where it gets even weirder. In 2014, an earthquake 200 miles north of Pumapunku revealed something strange underground. Buried beneath the modern village of Calamarca, radar scans found a grid of right angles, regular, deliberate structures made of stone, perfectly aligned to the layout of Pumapunku, as if it had been copied or returned. But no excavation was allowed. The site was quietly closed off, and now it's guarded. Why would authorities block access to buried stone? Unless what was buried wasn't supposed to be found. Or worse, it was never supposed to return. So what happened to the people who built the original Pumapunku? Where did they go? Some legends say they didn't go anywhere. They simply stepped sideways, out of sync with our time, into a version of the world where materials obey different laws and buildings don't fall apart, they shift. Not metaphorically, literally. They folded their world and carried it with them. And if the patterns in those stones are true, they may be planning to bring it back. Not because they need us, but because we're close to figuring out how they did it, and that's not something they ever wanted us to remember. The ship that was buried before ships existed. In the middle of a quiet desert in Saudi Arabia, far from any ocean, buried under layers of untouched sand, Archaeologists uncovered something no one was prepared for. A ship. Not a drawing, not a carving, but the remains of an actual ancient wooden vessel, perfectly shaped, reinforced with metal rivets, sections still intact. And the strangest part, it's older than any known sailing civilization in that region, thousands of years older, before the rise of the Sumerians, before the Nile had pyramids, before Mesopotamia had writing. This ship predates known maritime technology by thousands of years, yet it was built with precision, designed to float, steer, and carry cargo. But how? And why would it be buried beneath a desert? There is no water there, not even evidence that the area was once a shoreline. This is where the mystery deepens, because the wood used in the ship, cedar and acacia, isn't native to the area. It came from hundreds of miles away. Someone had to bring it in, build the ship in a place with no rivers, and then bury it. Or worse, abandon it after the water vanished. But when? And who were they? Local tribal legends speak of a sea of dust that once covered the land, a time when ships could sail between great islands of stone, and the sky turned red every evening. They say the ocean dried up in a single day, swallowed by the earth. But science doesn't confirm that. There's no direct evidence of an ocean where the ship was found, only loose traces, fossilized marine life deep beneath the surface, millions of years old. So the timeline doesn't match, unless we're wrong about time. Here's where things become strange. Alongside the buried ship, archaeologists found tools, chisels, nails, fragments of ceramics, all coated with a kind of mineralized dust. Not normal desert sand, but magnetic particles, almost metallic, like the kind found in certain meteor impact zones. There's no crater nearby, but the dust is real. It clings to everything. Some geologists believe it came from deep underground, forced up during a violent tectonic shift. Others think it came from space. But what does any of that have to do with a ship? That's the question that's gone unanswered for over a decade. Until recently, a researcher scanning satellite data noticed a faint line in the desert floor, a long winding channel, barely visible, but it ran for over 70 kilometers. It connected the site of the buried ship to an ancient dried basin, possibly once a shallow inland sea. It's faint and heavily eroded, but it lines up perfectly, almost like a forgotten river, not a modern one, an ancient water route, lost beneath millennia of dust and stone. So now the question becomes, were there once civilizations sailing these forgotten waters? And if so, where are their cities? Because a ship this advanced doesn't appear out of nowhere. It was built by someone who understood balance, weight, water flow. It had a carved keel, smoothed hull, and even evidence of a mast, possibly a sail, which means wind navigation. And that alone shatters the timeline of what we thought humans were capable of. But here's where the story twists again, because etched into the side of one wooden beam was a symbol. Not writing, not a logo, a symbol shaped like a spiral within a triangle, with dots surrounding it. It doesn't match any known ancient alphabet, but it does appear identical in two other places. Once on a stone wall at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and once deep inside a cave in coastal Peru. Two locations that should have no connection, and yet the symbol is the same. What was it? A marker? A signature? Or a warning? We don't know, because as soon as the discovery made headlines, something strange happened. The site was shut down. Officially, the reason was environmental protection, but unofficially, teams were pulled out, photos were scrubbed, and the few samples taken were never made public. Some whistleblowers claimed private corporations stepped in, quietly funding the excavation and locking down the area. One researcher leaked internal documents suggesting the ship wasn't the only object found. Apparently, scanning equipment detected other anomalies, cylindrical shapes, arranged in a line beneath the sand, like cargo, still sealed, still buried, and possibly not of wooden origin. That's all we know. No one's been allowed near the site since. But the mystery hasn't faded. If anything, it's growing. Because what does it mean if our ancestors weren't just walking, but sailing across vast inland seas, thousands of years earlier than we believed? And more importantly, where were they going? Because ships are tools of travel. They're meant to reach something, a destination, another shore. And if one ship was left behind, What if others made it? What if they crossed into places we've yet to rediscover? And what if those ancient roots are not entirely gone, just buried, waiting, like messages in a bottle, sealed beneath a desert that shouldn't hold ships at all? The forgotten city buried beneath the ice. Deep beneath the southern ice sheet of Antarctica, where no permanent human settlements exist and the cold is enough to shatter metal, a discovery was made that never reached the front pages. It happened quietly, a blip on a research radar, a strange reflection that didn't match the ice or the stone beneath it. At first, scientists thought it was an error, a glitch in the remote sensing satellite's imaging data. But as they reviewed older scans from decades past, they realized something strange. The anomaly had always been there, always hidden under nearly 2 miles of solid ice, and it wasn't a natural shape. It had angles, corners, patterns that didn't belong to geology. As the curiosity grew, international teams proposed expeditions, hoping to reach the site, but the conditions were nearly impossible. Winds reached over 200 kilometers per hour, temperatures plunged below -80, and worse, the ice was shifting constantly, with hidden crevasses that could swallow entire vehicles. Still, after years of preparation, a private research team finally made it, equipped with advanced drills, ice-penetrating radar, and enough supplies to survive for months in total isolation. What they found has never been fully released to the public. What we do know comes from a few leaks, satellite data that briefly appeared on open-source platforms before being removed, whispers from former researchers who spoke under pseudonyms, and one grainy image that still circulates in obscure forums to this day, a photograph showing what appears to be the top of a vast symmetrical structure poking through the ice. Not a rock formation, not a glacier cave, but a roof, possibly a dome, covered in carvings unlike anything seen on Earth. The carvings weren't random, they were organized in a sequence, some symbols repeated in a spiral, others in perfect rows. According to linguists who studied the leaked image, the designs didn't resemble any known script, but some showed superficial similarities to symbols found in the oldest known civilizations, like the Indus Valley, and even early Chinese oracle bones. But how could a structure, possibly an entire city, exist beneath Antarctica? The continent has been frozen for millions of years. Or has it? Because that's where this story takes a darker turn. In 1995, a declassified CIA document confirmed what some scientists had long suspected. Antarctica may not have always been in its current position, due to something called crustal displacement, a theory that suggests the entire outer shell of the Earth can shift rapidly. The continent might once have been located thousands of miles further north in a temperate zone, not covered in ice, but green, habitable, and alive. This theory isn't mainstream. It's often dismissed as pseudoscience. But maps like the Piri-Reis chart, a 16th century map that shows the coast of Antarctica in stunning detail, centuries before it was officially discovered, continue to raise questions that no one can fully answer. How did a map from the 1500s depict land features buried under ice that wasn't supposedly explored until the 20th century, unless someone saw it ice-free? And if it was ice-free, that means humans or something else may have built there, lived there, possibly even fled from there. According to one former researcher, the team that reached the buried structure didn't just find one building, they found dozens, arranged in a grid, with long, perfectly straight corridors, some stretching for hundreds of meters under the ice. One corridor had walls made from a smooth black stone that didn't match the surrounding geology. Another ended in a massive circular room, perfectly symmetrical, with a raised central platform. And in that room, something was found. A sealed capsule, covered in the same mysterious writing. Inside it, unknown. The contents were never disclosed. Shortly after this phase of the excavation, the entire site was shut down. Not paused, not postponed. Shut down. Researchers were flown out within days. All files were marked as classified. The satellite imagery over that specific section of Antarctica was blurred, and the coordinates were erased from public databases. To this day, the official explanation is environmental protection, but many believe otherwise. Some say what was found wasn't human, that it predates all known history, that the city buried under the ice is older than Göbekli Tepe, older than Jericho, perhaps even older than humanity itself. If true, it means we are not the first civilization, we are not even the second, we are only the latest in a cycle of rise, collapse, and forgetting. And the ice, it's not just preserving history, it's hiding it, because if this city was real, it would change everything we know about the past. It would prove that intelligent beings once lived where now only snow falls, that they built great halls, engineered with mathematics far beyond their time, and then vanished, buried beneath a continent that drifted into a tomb of ice. Some scientists believe more anomalies remain beneath the Antarctic sheet, ancient roads, metallic objects with electromagnetic signatures, but exploration is now tightly controlled. Access to certain regions is denied without explanation, and every time new satellite imagery leaks, it is swiftly removed. Still, the idea refuses to fade, because mysteries like this have a way of surviving, not just through whispers and rumors, but through our own deep sense that the world we know is only a fraction of what once existed, a glimpse, a broken page from a much older book, and somewhere beneath the endless white silence of Antarctica, more pages are waiting, buried, frozen, not gone, just hidden, waiting for someone to find them again. The unfinished machine beneath the desert. In the vast silence of the Middle Eastern deserts, beneath dunes that haven't shifted in centuries, something was found, not by treasure hunters, not by archaeologists, but by accident during a routine geological scan for oil reserves. What appeared on their equipment made no sense. It wasn't a cavern, it wasn't a natural fault line, it was something with precision, something artificial, but deeper than anything man was known to have built. At first, the oil company sent a team to investigate. What they found left them speechless. Nearly 150 feet below the sand was an opening, a perfect ring carved into solid bedrock. Around it, evenly spaced indentations, like grooves in a gear. The workers who descended into the chamber were the first humans to step inside in perhaps tens of thousands of years. And what they saw was not a tomb, not a temple, but a mechanism. Massive stone arms radiated from the central shaft, each arm connected to smaller gear-like protrusions embedded in the surrounding walls. Everything was carved from a single type of stone, not local limestone or sandstone, but something harder, denser, dark gray, almost metallic in appearance. And yet it wasn't metal, it was something else, something unknown. Even stranger, there were no carvings, no inscriptions, no symbols to identify who made it, when, or why. But the entire structure was arranged with such mathematical precision that one geologist compared it to the inside of a clock, except this clock was larger than a two-story building and completely buried beneath a desert with no known civilization ever recorded in that region. And that's when the real questions began. What was it for? Why was it underground? And most of all, why was it unfinished? Because one section of the machine, the fourth arm, was clearly incomplete. The arm ended in a rough, chiseled edge, as if someone had been working on it, and stopped. Tools were found nearby, not metal ones, but strange fibrous implements preserved in airtight compartments, similar to modern carbon fiber, but completely organic in structure. Radiocarbon dating placed them at over 18,000 years old. That's thousands of years before the Sumerians, before writing, before the wheel. This discovery didn't just stretch the timeline, it tore it open, because what the team had uncovered wasn't simply old, it was advanced, beyond comprehension. And then something even stranger happened. One of the workers, trying to document the layout with a laser scanner, noticed something strange in the data. When scanned at high frequency, the entire chamber resonated, not audibly, but at a harmonic frequency in the infrared spectrum. It was as if the structure itself was designed to vibrate, and with that vibration, something shifted. Dust fell from the ceiling. A crack appeared in one of the stone arms. And deep beneath the central ring, they heard a sound, a slow rhythmic echo, almost like breathing. After that, everything changed. The oil company shut down the site. The entrance was filled with sand. The documents, scans, and samples were seized by authorities. All team members were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, but fragments of the story still got out, through forums, private blogs, emails sent anonymously to journalists who didn't know what to do with them. But here's what makes it even more unsettling. this wasn't the only one. Over the next decade, similar machines were discovered, one in the Gobi Desert, partially crushed by shifting rock, another near the Sahara, but so deep underground that only partial sonar scans were captured, all of them incomplete, all of them silent, and all of them identical, different continents, different depths, same design. No one knows who built them, no one knows what they were meant to do, but some believe they were connected, not machines in the way we understand, but perhaps stabilizers, generators, or worse, locks, holding something in place, or keeping something from emerging. And if they were unfinished, did the builders run out of time, or did something happen that forced them to abandon their work? Many researchers now believe our current understanding of the past is only a fraction of what really existed, that we are not the pinnacle of civilization, but merely the survivors of an unknown history, one that spanned the globe, one that reached levels of engineering and design we still can't replicate. The strange resonance detected in the chamber beneath the desert is still unexplained. Some think the vibrations were meant to interact with planetary harmonics, subtle frequencies that ripple through the Earth's crust, like tuning forks or signal transmitters. But what signal were they sending, or receiving, and to whom? One final note. Before the site was buried, one last scan was conducted, this time using ground-penetrating radar across the surrounding 5 kilometers. The results were never published officially, but a leaked rendering shows something terrifying, a buried network of tunnels, dozens of them, all leading outward from the central machine, all sealed, and at the very end of the largest tunnel, a chamber, spherical, hollow, still unopened. No one knows what's inside, and maybe that's for the best, because some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, some machines weren't meant to run, and some doors were never meant to open.
In the year 830 AD, Maya scribes carved a date into stone that would chill you to the bone. December 21st, 2012. They predicted the end of the world, and then, mysteriously, their own civilization vanished into the jungle, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions that still haunt archaeologists today. Welcome back to Eerie and Weird, where history's mysteries come to light. I'm about to tell you the spine-tingling story of how an ancient civilization not only foresaw a global catastrophe over 1,000 years in the future, but seemed to orchestrate their own disappearance as if they knew something we don't. Picture this. You're standing in the dense rainforests of Guatemala, surrounded by towering pyramids covered in centuries of vegetation. The air is thick with humidity and the weight of secrets. These aren't just ruins. They're the remnants of one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, a people who could calculate the movements of planets with terrifying accuracy. The Maya didn't just build monuments. They built mathematical time machines. Their long-count calendar was so precise, it could predict solar eclipses thousands of years into the future. But here's where it gets eerie. Embedded within their stone monuments was a countdown to December 21st, 2012, a date they marked as the end of the current world cycle. When 2012 arrived, millions of people around the globe held their breath. Doomsday preppers stockpiled supplies. Movies were made. The world watched and waited. But nothing happened. Or did it? The Maya knew something we're only beginning to understand. They weren't predicting the end of the world. They were predicting the end of their world. And the most chilling part? They were off by only 1,182 years. Between 800 and 900 AD, something impossible happened. Cities that housed millions of people were abandoned almost overnight. Not destroyed by war, not ravaged by plague, simply left behind. Imagine Times Square suddenly empty, with half-eaten meals still on tables and children's toys scattered in the streets. This wasn't gradual decline. This was systematic evacuation on a scale that defies explanation. In Tikal, Guatemala's largest Maya city, the population dropped from 100,000 to virtually zero in less than a century. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 909 AD, and then silence. But here's what makes your skin crawl. The Maya didn't just abandon their cities randomly. They seemed to follow a pattern, as if following some predetermined plan. The northern cities emptied first, then the southern ones, moving in a wave that swept across the entire Maya world, like a slow-motion tsunami of abandonment. Archaeological evidence suggests they didn't flee in panic. Tools were carefully stored. Sacred objects were deliberately buried. It's as if they knew they weren't coming back, as if they were following a script written in the stars themselves. What did they know that we don't? What could make an entire civilization simply disappear? Drop a comment below if you think the Maya were following a cosmic countdown. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The Maya left us clues, but they're written in a code we're still trying to crack. Their monuments tell stories of kings and gods, but buried within the dates and names are warnings that make your blood run cold. At Quirigua, Guatemala, stone monuments called stele record a series of cosmic events, solar eclipses, planetary alignments, and something they called the darkening of the sky. These weren't just astronomical observations. They were countdown markers to catastrophe. But here's the truly unsettling part. Modern climate data reveals that the Maya collapse coincided with the worst drought in 1,000 years. Tree ring data shows rainfall dropped by 70% across the Maya region. The question isn't whether they knew this was coming. The question is how they knew. Their agricultural terraces and water management systems could have sustained them through normal droughts. These weren't primitive people. They were master engineers who had survived climate challenges for centuries. So why did they abandon everything just when they needed their infrastructure most? Some researchers believe the Maya elite possessed knowledge that went beyond conventional astronomy. They may have understood climate cycles that we're only now beginning to comprehend. Their prophecies weren't supernatural. They were scientific predictions based on patterns they'd observed for millennia. The stone carvings at Palenque speak of the return of the darkness and the time when the rain lords sleep. These aren't metaphors. They're meteorological forecasts carved in stone, warnings left for future generations who might be smart enough to decode them. What do you think? Were the Maya ancient climate scientists or something even more mysterious? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because this story gets even stranger. The Maya weren't just calendar makers. They were cosmic archaeologists, digging through time itself to uncover patterns that repeat across centuries. Their understanding of astronomy was so advanced that they could predict the position of Venus for thousands of years into the future with an accuracy that rivals modern computers. But their most disturbing discovery was what they called the Great Cycle, a 5,125-year period that they believed represented the lifespan of the current world. According to their calculations, our current cycle began on August 11th, 3114 BC, and was destined to end on December 21st, 2012. Here's where it gets genuinely frightening. The Maya weren't the only ancient civilization tracking this cycle. The Aztecs had their own version called the Five Suns, each representing a world that had been destroyed and reborn. The Hindu concept of yugas describes similar cycles of cosmic time. It's as if multiple civilizations independently discovered the same terrifying truth about the nature of existence. The Maya believed that at the end of each great cycle, the world would be refreshed, destroyed, and recreated. They saw themselves as living through the fourth world, with the fifth world beginning in 2012. But unlike other civilizations that feared these transitions, the Maya seemed to embrace them. Their disappearance wasn't random, it was timed. They vanished just as they calculated the old world was ending, as if they chose to step aside and make room for whatever was coming next. The question that haunts researchers is, where did they go? Recent discoveries in the deepest caves of the Yucatan Peninsula have revealed Maya artifacts dating to the time of the collapse, suggesting some groups may have literally gone underground. Were they waiting, hiding, preparing for the return of the new cycle? This is getting seriously creepy. Drop a comment if you think the Maya found a way to survive their own prophecy, and smash that subscribe button, because we're about to reveal the most chilling discovery of all. Here's what will keep you awake at night. The Maya disappearance might not be over. In 2012, when their predicted world-end date arrived, something did happen, just not what anyone expected. Climate scientists now recognize 2012 as a tipping point in global climate change. Arctic ice began melting at unprecedented rates. Weather patterns shifted dramatically. The very year the Maya predicted world transformation, our planet began experiencing changes that matched their ancient descriptions of world renewal. But the truly eerie part? Maya communities that survived in remote areas began emerging from isolation around 2012. After centuries of avoiding contact with the outside world, they started sharing knowledge that had been kept secret for generations. It's as if some invisible timer had gone off, releasing them from an ancient pact of silence. Modern Maya spiritual leaders speak of 2012 not as an ending, but as a time of awakening. They describe their ancestors' disappearance not as abandonment, but as a strategic withdrawal, a way of preserving their knowledge for the moment when the world would need it most. Archaeological teams are now discovering Maya sites that were deliberately sealed and left with instructions for future generations. These time capsules contain sophisticated knowledge about sustainable agriculture, water management, and astronomical prediction that could help us navigate our current climate crisis. The Maya didn't predict the end of the world in 2012. They predicted the end of the old world and the beginning of a new one. A world where their descendants would emerge from the shadows to share the wisdom their ancestors preserved through the darkness. The Maya collapse isn't just an ancient mystery, it's a prophecy still unfolding. They didn't vanish, they transformed, leaving behind a puzzle that we're only now beginning to solve. Their empty cities weren't signs of failure but markers of transition, guideposts for a civilization that saw further into the future than we ever imagined possible. The next time you hear about climate change, Remember the Maya. They faced the same challenges we're facing now, but they had something we don't. 1,000 years of advance warning. The question isn't whether they survived their own prophecy, but whether we'll be wise enough to learn from their example. The jungle keeps its secrets, but every year, archaeologists uncover new pieces of the puzzle. The Maya story isn't over, it's just beginning. What do you think happened to the Maya? Are they still out there waiting for the right moment to return? Share your theories in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you want to dive deeper into history's greatest mysteries. And ring that notification bell because next week, we're exploring another civilization that saw the future and tried to warn us about it. Until then, keep questioning everything. The truth is always stranger than fiction.
Imagine this. You're hiking through the remote canyons of Mesa Verde, Colorado, when suddenly you stumble upon something extraordinary. Towering cliff dwellings, perfectly preserved after 700 years. Their windows like empty eyes staring back at you. But here's the chilling part. These magnificent cities were abandoned in a single generation, left behind as if their inhabitants simply vanished. Welcome back to Eerie and Weird, where we explore history's greatest mysteries. Today, we're diving into one of archaeology's most puzzling enigmas. What happened to the ancestral Puebloans, and why did an entire civilization disappear almost overnight? But before we uncover this 800-year-old mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we discover today. And stick around until the end, because I'll reveal the most shocking theory about their disappearance that will completely change how you see this ancient mystery. To understand this mysterious disappearance, we first need to meet the people who vanished. The ancestral Puebloans, once called the Anasazi, though this Navajo term meaning ancient enemies has fallen out of favor, were one of North America's most sophisticated prehistoric civilizations. For over 1,300 years, from roughly 100 to 1300 CE, these remarkable people called the Four Corners region of the American Southwest their home. Picture this vast landscape, the rugged terrain where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet today. It was here, in this seemingly harsh and unforgiving environment, that the ancestral Puebloans built something extraordinary. These weren't nomadic hunter-gatherers scraping by in the desert. No, the ancestral Puebloans were master architects, skilled farmers, and sophisticated astronomers. They constructed elaborate irrigation systems that brought life to arid lands, grew corn, beans, and squash in quantities that could feed thousands, and built structures so advanced that they still leave modern engineers scratching their heads. Their pottery was exquisite, black-on-white geometric designs that are considered among the finest in North American prehistory. They wove baskets so tightly they could hold water, created turquoise jewelry that was traded across vast distances, and developed a complex social system that governed their communities. But it was their architecture that truly set them apart. Starting around 1050 CE, during what archaeologists call the Pueblo II period, they began an unprecedented construction boom. They built great houses, massive stone structures rising 4 stories high, containing hundreds of rooms and requiring millions of precisely cut sandstone blocks. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico became their cultural center, a place so magnificent it defies explanation. Pueblo Bonito, the largest structure, contained over 600 rooms and stood 4 stories tall. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. These buildings were aligned with astronomical phenomena, solar and lunar cycles that the ancestral Puebloans tracked with incredible precision. And then there were the cliff dwellings. Starting around 1150 CE, they began constructing entire cities within the natural alcoves of canyon walls. Mesa Verde's Cliff Palace housed over 150 people in a space that seems impossible to build, let alone inhabit. But why am I telling you all this? Because understanding the sophistication and success of ancestral Puebloan civilization makes their sudden disappearance even more mysterious. This wasn't a struggling society on the brink of collapse. This was a thriving civilization at its peak. So what could cause such a successful people to abandon everything they had built? Here's where our story takes a dramatic turn. Around 1300 CE, something unprecedented happened. The ancestral Puebloans began abandoning their magnificent cities, their carefully tended fields, and their sacred sites. But this wasn't a gradual decline. Archaeological evidence suggests this exodus happened within a single generation, possibly within just a few decades. Imagine walking through Chaco Canyon in 1250 CE. You'd see bustling communities, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the plazas, and artisans crafting pottery and jewelry. Fast forward just 50 years to 1300 CE, and you'd find silence, empty buildings, abandoned tools, a ghost town on a massive scale. The numbers are staggering. Tens of thousands of people, possibly over 100,000, simply packed up and left. They abandoned not just individual homes, but entire regions. The Four Corners area, which had been continuously occupied for over a millennium, became a virtual no-man's land. But here's what makes this even more mysterious. They left behind virtually everything. Pottery vessels sitting where they were last used. Tools abandoned in mid-construction. Food storage areas still containing corn and beans. It's as if they expected to return, but never did. Tree-ring dating has given us precise timelines for this abandonment, and the pattern is clear across the entire region. Mesa Verde, abandoned by 1300 CE. Chaco Canyon, largely empty by 1250 CE. Canyon de Chelly, evacuated around the same time. It's like watching dominoes fall across the landscape. Archaeological teams have found houses with fires still in the hearths, covered by centuries of dust. Sandals left at doorways. Personal possessions scattered as if their owners left in haste. Some sites show evidence of careful abandonment, rooms sealed and valuable items removed, while others suggest hasty departures. But where did they go? This massive population didn't simply vanish into thin air. The answer to that question reveals just how remarkable this migration truly was. The ancestral Puebloans moved south and east, joining and establishing new communities along the Rio Grande River in New Mexico and in Arizona's Hopi Mesas. Their descendants became the modern Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, Acoma, Santa Clara, San Ildefonso, and many others. These communities maintain oral traditions that speak of long journeys from the north, of leaving the homes of their ancestors for new lands. But knowing where they went doesn't answer the bigger question. Why? What could force such a successful civilization to abandon everything and start over? Now, if you're finding this mystery as fascinating as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're about to explore the theories that attempt to explain this incredible disappearance, and some of them will shock you. The first and most widely accepted theory centers on climate change, but not the kind you might think. Between 1276 and 1299 CE, the American Southwest experienced what researchers call the Great Drought, one of the most severe and prolonged droughts in the region's recorded history. Tree-ring analysis from throughout the Four Corners region tells a story of increasingly desperate conditions. Annual precipitation dropped to levels that made agriculture nearly impossible. The sophisticated farming systems that had supported dense populations for centuries began to fail. Think about this from the perspective of an ancestral Puebloan farmer in 1280 CE. Your ancestors had successfully grown crops in this land for over 1,000 years. Your irrigation systems were marvels of engineering. Your knowledge of soil, weather, and agricultural cycles was passed down through generations. But now, year after year, the rains don't come. Your carefully tended fields produce smaller and smaller harvests. Your water sources dry up. But drought alone doesn't explain the complete abandonment. These people had survived droughts before, some lasting decades. They had developed sophisticated water conservation techniques, drought-resistant crop varieties, and storage systems designed to last through lean years. This is where environmental degradation enters the picture. By 1200 CE, the ancestral Puebloans had been intensively farming the same lands for centuries. Soil erosion was becoming a serious problem. Deforestation from construction and fuel needs had altered local ecosystems. Some researchers believe they had literally outgrown the carrying capacity of their environment. Dr. Timothy Kohler's research at Washington State University suggests that population growth had pushed ancestral Puebloan society to the breaking point. Using sophisticated computer models, his team calculated that by 1280 CE, the population may have exceeded what the land could sustainably support even in good years. Add climate change to this environmental stress, and you have a perfect storm. But wait, there's more to this story that makes it even more complex. Recent research has revealed that the Great Drought wasn't uniform across the region. Some areas received more rainfall than others. Some river valleys maintained reliable water sources. So why didn't the ancestral Puebloans simply move to these better-watered areas within their traditional homeland? This is where we encounter one of the most intriguing aspects of the abandonment. It appears to have been coordinated and widespread, not the gradual migration you'd expect from environmental pressure alone. Which brings us to our next theory, one that suggests something far more dramatic than climate change was at work. But before we dive into that darker possibility, let me ask you this. What do you think could cause an entire civilization to abandon their homeland? Drop your theories in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of the most insightful observations come from you, our viewers. What if the ancestral Puebloans didn't leave voluntarily? What if they were forced out by something far more immediate and terrifying than drought? Warfare and violence on a scale that made their homeland uninhabitable. This theory emerged from some of archaeology's most disturbing discoveries. In the 1990s, excavations at several ancestral Puebloan sites uncovered evidence that challenged the peaceful image these people had maintained for decades. What archaeologists found was shocking. Clear signs of warfare, massacre, and even cannibalism. At Castle Rock Pueblo in Colorado, researchers discovered the remains of 41 individuals who had died violently around 1280 CE. The evidence was unmistakable: cut marks on bones, burning, and disarticulation that suggested not just death, but systematic dismemberment. Similar evidence was found at Cowboy Wash, Sand Canyon Pueblo, and other sites throughout the region. But this wasn't just isolated violence. The pattern of fortified settlements tells a story of increasing fear and militarization. Starting around 1150 CE, about 150 years before the abandonment, ancestral Puebloan communities began building in increasingly defensive positions. Cliff dwellings weren't just architectural marvels, they were fortresses. Consider Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings from this perspective. These weren't built in alcoves for protection from the weather. They were built there because they were nearly impossible to attack. The only access was through narrow, easily defended passages. The location provided clear views of approaching enemies and multiple escape routes through the canyon system. Archaeologist Lawrence Keeley's research suggests that warfare became endemic in the late ancestral Puebloan period. Tower structures that were once thought to be ceremonial or astronomical are now interpreted as watchtowers. Defensive walls began appearing around settlements. Tool assemblages show increasing numbers of weapons. But who were they fighting? The evidence suggests it wasn't external invaders, but warfare between ancestral Puebloan groups themselves. Climate stress and resource scarcity had apparently triggered a breakdown in social order. Competition for dwindling farmland and water sources led to raiding, retaliation, and escalating cycles of violence. Some researchers propose that this internal warfare became so destructive that it made entire regions uninhabitable. Social networks that had maintained peace and trade for centuries collapsed. Trust between communities evaporated. The very social structures that had allowed ancestral Puebloan civilization to flourish began to tear it apart. Dr. Stephen LeBlanc of Harvard's Peabody Museum argues that the combination of environmental stress and warfare created a positive feedback loop. Drought led to resource competition, which led to warfare, which disrupted agricultural systems, which intensified resource scarcity, which led to more warfare. But there's a problem with the warfare theory standing alone. If violence was the primary cause of abandonment, why don't we see more evidence of wholesale slaughter? Why weren't the cliff dwellings destroyed by conquerors? Why did the migration appear so organized rather than a panicked flight? The answer might lie in a theory that combines environmental stress, warfare, and something else entirely, something that gets to the heart of what it meant to be ancestral Puebloan. And that's where our story takes perhaps its most fascinating turn. But first, I want to hear from you. Which theory do you find most convincing so far? Are you team climate change, team warfare, or do you think there's something else entirely going on here? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed because what we're about to explore next will challenge everything you think you know about this mystery. Here's where our investigation takes a truly fascinating turn. What if the ancestral Puebloans didn't abandon their homeland because they had to, but because they chose to? What if their disappearance was actually a deliberate, religiously motivated migration based on prophecy and spiritual belief? This theory emerges from careful study of ancestral Puebloan religious practices and modern Pueblo oral traditions. The ancestral Puebloans weren't just farmers and builders. They were deeply spiritual people whose entire worldview was based on maintaining cosmic balance and harmony with the natural world. Their architecture reflects this spiritual focus. Kivas, circular, underground ceremonial chambers, were the heart of every community. These weren't just meeting places. They were sacred spaces where rituals essential to community survival were performed. Rain ceremonies, seasonal celebrations, and coming-of-age rituals all took place in these carefully constructed underground rooms. But here's what's crucial to understanding this theory. Ancestral Puebloan religion was intimately connected to place. Specific landscapes were sacred. Particular mountains, springs, and rock formations were considered the homes of spiritual beings. Their cosmology was literally rooted in the geography of the Four Corners region. Dr. Ruth Van Dyke of Binghamton University has studied the astronomical alignments of ancestral Puebloan architecture and found that they were tracking complex celestial cycles, not just solar and lunar cycles, but the movements of planets and stars over decades and centuries. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of time and prophecy. What if their astronomical observations led them to conclude that a great cycle was ending? Modern Pueblo peoples maintain oral traditions about migrations guided by spiritual prophecy. The Hopi speak of following a star to their destined homeland. Other Pueblo groups tell stories of leaving previous homes when the spirits told them it was time to move on. Some researchers believe that the environmental and social stresses of the late 1200s were interpreted through this religious lens as signs that the spiritual contract with their homeland had been broken. The drought, the warfare, the social breakdown, all of these could have been seen as evidence that the cosmic balance had been disrupted and it was time for a great migration. But there's an even more specific possibility. Archaeological evidence suggests that the traditional religious and social hierarchies that had governed ancestral Puebloan society for centuries were breaking down by 1200 CE. The great houses of Chaco Canyon appear to have lost their influence. Regional centers that had coordinated trade and ceremony were abandoned. Dr. Stephen Plogg's research indicates that the complex social networks that had integrated ancestral Puebloan communities across vast distances were collapsing. The roads that connected Chaco Canyon to outlying communities fell into disuse. The standardized pottery styles that had reflected shared cultural identity became more localized and diverse. This social fragmentation might have triggered a crisis of meaning. If the traditional ways of maintaining cosmic balance weren't working, if the ceremonies weren't bringing rain, if the social hierarchies weren't preventing violence, then perhaps it was time for a fundamental renewal. The migration south and east could have been seen as a return to origins, a spiritual rebirth. Many Pueblo creation stories speak of emergence from underground worlds and journeys to promised lands. The abandonment of the Four Corners region might have been understood as part of this sacred cycle of emergence, migration, and renewal. But here's what makes this theory particularly compelling. It explains the organized nature of the abandonment. If this was a religiously motivated migration guided by spiritual leaders and prophetic visions, it would explain why entire communities left together, why the timing was so coordinated across the region, and why they seemed to know exactly where they were going. Modern Pueblo peoples describe their ancestors' departure not as abandonment or failure, but as completion, the fulfillment of their spiritual purpose in that land and the beginning of a new chapter in their sacred journey. This gives us a completely different way of understanding the mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans. Maybe it wasn't mysterious at all. Maybe it was exactly what was supposed to happen. But before we conclude our investigation, there's one more theory we need to explore, one that combines elements of all the others and might provide the most complete explanation for this incredible historical puzzle. After examining all these theories, here's what I believe really happened to the ancestral Puebloans, and why their disappearance might not be as mysterious as we first thought. The truth is, it probably wasn't one single cause but a perfect storm of interconnected factors that created both the necessity and the opportunity for one of prehistory's greatest migrations. Picture this scenario. By 1200 CE, ancestral Puebloan civilization had reached a critical threshold. Population growth had pushed communities to the limits of what their environment could sustainably support. They had been farming the same lands intensively for centuries, and soil depletion was reducing crop yields. Deforestation for construction and fuel had altered local ecosystems. Then came the Great Drought of 1276 to 1299 CE. But this wasn't just any drought. It was the kind of extended dry period that happens once every few centuries. For a civilization already stressed by overpopulation and environmental degradation, this drought was catastrophic. As resources became scarce, the social bonds that had held ancestral Puebloan society together began to fray. Competition for farmland and water sources triggered warfare between communities that had peacefully coexisted for generations. Trust networks collapsed. Trade relationships ended. The great ceremonial centers lost their ability to coordinate regional cooperation. But here's the crucial part. The ancestral Puebloans were too sophisticated to simply collapse. They had options. Their extensive trade networks had given them detailed knowledge of other regions. They knew about the river valleys to the south and east where water was more reliable and land was available. Their astronomical observations and spiritual traditions may have provided the framework for understanding these events not as random catastrophes but as part of a cosmic cycle. The drought, the warfare, the social breakdown, all could be interpreted as signs that it was time for a great migration, a spiritual renewal. So the abandonment wasn't a panicked flight or a tragic collapse. It was a calculated decision by communities that chose adaptation over destruction. They looked at their deteriorating situation and made a collective choice to start over somewhere else. The migration was organized because it was planned. Different communities probably coordinated their departures to avoid overwhelming the regions they were moving to. They took essential knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices with them while leaving behind the physical structures that were too costly to move. What we call the mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans was actually one of prehistory's most successful adaptations to environmental and social crisis. Instead of fighting a losing battle against drought and resource depletion, they chose transformation. And it worked. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear. They became the modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona. Their descendants continue to thrive today, maintaining many of the same cultural traditions, architectural techniques, and spiritual practices that characterized their ancestors. The cliff dwellings and great houses they left behind weren't failures or tragedies. They were graduation gifts to the future, preserved examples of what human ingenuity and cooperation can accomplish. So what can we learn from the ancestral Puebloans? Their story offers profound lessons for our own time as we face our own environmental and social challenges. First, sustainability matters. The ancestral Puebloans thrived for over 1,000 years because they developed technologies and social systems adapted to their environment. But when they pushed beyond sustainable limits, when population growth and intensive agriculture exceeded the land's carrying capacity, the entire system became vulnerable to external shocks like drought. Second, social cooperation is essential for survival. The ancestral Puebloans' greatest achievements, their architecture, their agricultural systems, their trade networks, all required unprecedented levels of cooperation between communities. When social trust broke down, Their ability to respond effectively to crisis was compromised. Third, adaptation is better than destruction. Faced with insurmountable challenges in their traditional homeland, the ancestral Puebloans chose transformation over collapse. They used their knowledge, skills, and social networks to create new communities in new places rather than fighting a losing battle against impossible odds. Fourth, culture is portable. The ancestral Puebloans left behind their buildings, but they took their knowledge, traditions, and identities with them. What made them who they were wasn't tied to specific places but to shared ways of understanding and organizing the world. Finally, apparent endings can actually be new beginnings. What looks like disappearance or failure from one perspective can be successful adaptation from another. The lost civilization of the ancestral Puebloans lives on in their descendants, who continue to draw strength from their ancestors' remarkable legacy of resilience and adaptation. These lessons feel particularly relevant today as we grapple with climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation, and the challenge of building sustainable communities. The ancestral Puebloans show us that even the most successful civilizations must be prepared to adapt and transform when circumstances change. Their story reminds us that human societies are not fixed or permanent but dynamic systems that can choose how to respond to challenge and change. The choice between adaptation and collapse may be the most important decision any civilization ever makes. The mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans turns out to be not so mysterious after all. It's the story of a sophisticated civilization that faced unprecedented challenges and chose transformation over destruction. They didn't vanish, they evolved. Their empty cliff dwellings and abandoned great houses aren't monuments to failure but testaments to successful adaptation. They remind us that sometimes the most courageous choice is knowing when to let go of the past and embrace an uncertain future. The next time you visit Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon, don't just see ruins. See graduation ceremonies. See communities that chose to begin again rather than fight battles they couldn't win. See ancestors who gave their descendants the greatest gift possible: the knowledge that survival sometimes means having the wisdom to start over. What do you think? Does this change how you see the ancestral Puebloans? Do their lessons apply to our own time? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed unraveling this ancient mystery with me, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's greatest puzzles. Give this video a thumbs up if it changed how you think about the past, and share it with anyone who loves a good historical mystery. Next week, we're exploring another vanished civilization, the mysterious sea peoples who brought down the Bronze Age. Trust me, that's another story you won't want to miss. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries have the most human answers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Picture this. The year is 1177 BCE. The most powerful empires in human history are crumbling to dust. The mighty Hittites, who once challenged Egypt itself, have vanished overnight. Cities burn from Greece to the Levant. Entire civilizations are being wiped from existence by mysterious invaders who came from the sea. Who were these phantom destroyers? Where did they come from? And how did they bring down empires that had ruled for centuries with nothing but bronze weapons and wooden ships? Today, we're diving into one of history's greatest mysteries: the sea peoples who may have triggered the first dark age in recorded history. But before we uncover the truth behind these ancient raiders, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see the ancient world. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some historians believe the sea peoples were the ancient world's equivalent of a zombie apocalypse. To understand the catastrophe the sea peoples unleashed, we need to travel back to the late Bronze Age, around 1300 to 1200 BCE. This was the ancient world's golden age, a time when great empires stretched across the Mediterranean like a complex web of power and prosperity. In Egypt, the new kingdom pharaohs ruled with divine authority. Ramesses II had just finished his legendary reign, leaving behind monuments that still awe us today. To the north, the Hittite Empire controlled much of modern-day Turkey and Syria, their iron weapons giving them a technological edge that made them feared across the known world. The Mycenaean Greeks dominated the Aegean Sea, their palace cities like Pylos and Tiryns controlling vast trade networks. These weren't just warriors, they were sophisticated administrators who kept detailed records on clay tablets, tracking everything from livestock to luxury goods. But here's where it gets interesting and terrifying. Archaeological evidence shows that around 1200 BCE, this entire interconnected world began to collapse in a domino effect of destruction that would make the fall of Rome look like a minor inconvenience. But what could possibly bring down multiple empires simultaneously? The answer lies in the mysterious chronicles of Egyptian scribes who recorded encounters with invaders they called the peoples of the sea. The first clue comes from the walls of Medinet Habu, where Pharaoh Ramesses III carved a chilling account of his battles against these mysterious invaders. But here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. The Egyptians, who were meticulous record keepers, seem almost confused by what they're describing. The inscriptions read like something out of a disaster movie. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. Think about that for a moment. The Egyptians, who had faced countless enemies and documented every military campaign in excruciating detail, are describing something they've never seen before. These weren't just raiders or invaders. They were something entirely different. The Egyptian records mention specific groups: the Peleset, the Tieka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh. But here's the mystery that has puzzled historians for decades. We have almost no other records of these peoples from any other source. It's as if they appeared out of nowhere, destroyed everything in their path, and then vanished back into the mists of history. But where did they really come from? Before we reveal the shocking theories about their origins, let me know in the comments, have you ever heard of the Sea Peoples before this video? And what do you think could make entire civilizations disappear? Your theories might be closer to the truth than you think. The archaeological evidence is absolutely staggering. Across the eastern Mediterranean, archaeologists have uncovered what they call destruction layers, thick bands of ash and debris that tell the story of systematic devastation. At Ugarit, one of the Bronze Age's greatest trading cities, excavations revealed a scene of utter chaos. Houses were burned, valuable items were left scattered as if people fled in panic, and cuneiform tablets were found still in the kiln where they were being baked when disaster struck. One tablet contains a desperate plea for help. The enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. But Ugarit wasn't alone. Troy, the legendary city of Homer's Iliad, shows evidence of violent destruction around this same period. Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, the great centers of Greek civilization, were all abandoned or destroyed. Even the mighty Hittite capital of Hattusa was burned and left empty. Here's what makes this truly mind-boggling. These destructions happened within a span of just 50 years, across thousands of miles of territory. We're talking about a coordinated collapse that affected civilizations from Greece to Syria to Cyprus. But here's the question that will keep you up at night. How could Bronze Age raiders accomplish what even massive armies had failed to do for centuries? The most detailed accounts of the Sea Peoples come from Egyptian sources, particularly from the reigns of Merneptah and Ramesses III. These pharaohs didn't just fight the Sea Peoples. They documented their encounters with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Merneptah's account, carved around 1208 BCE, describes a confederation of peoples attacking Egypt's western border in alliance with the Libyans. But what's fascinating is how he describes their movement. They came from their islands and their mainland, their hearts confident and trusting. This isn't the language typically used for traditional enemies. The Egyptians are describing something unprecedented. Entire populations on the move, not just raiding parties. Ramesses III's accounts, dating to around 1175 BCE, are even more dramatic. His scribes write, "As for the foreign countries, they made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Code, Karshemish, Arzawa, and Elashion, being cut off at one time. Notice something crucial here. The Egyptians are saying that established kingdoms were cut off at one time. This suggests coordinated, simultaneous attacks across vast distances. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The Egyptian reliefs show something unprecedented in ancient warfare. The Sea Peoples brought their families with them. Women, children, and elderly people are depicted in ox carts, suggesting this wasn't just a military campaign, it was a massive migration. What could force entire civilizations to abandon their homes and take to the sea? The answer might be more terrifying than invasion itself. But before we reveal what may have driven these mysterious peoples to destroy the ancient world, hit that like button if you're as fascinated by this mystery as I am. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're about to explore theories that will completely change how you think about ancient history. So where did the Sea Peoples actually come from? Historians and archaeologists have proposed several mind-blowing theories, each more fascinating than the last. Theory 1. The climate catastrophe. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that the Late Bronze Age ended with a severe climate crisis. Core samples from lakes and ice sheets show evidence of prolonged drought and cooling temperatures around 1200 BCE. Imagine entire regions becoming uninhabitable, forcing massive populations to abandon their homelands and seek new territory by any means necessary. This would explain why the Sea Peoples brought their families. They weren't planning to return home because there was no home to return to. They were climate refugees with bronze weapons and nothing to lose. Theory 2. The Trojan War connection. Some scholars believe the Sea Peoples were actually displaced Mycenaean Greeks. Think about it, the traditional date for the Trojan War is around 1184 BCE, right in the middle of the Sea Peoples' rampage. What if the legendary conflict described in Homer's Iliad was actually part of this larger collapse? Picture this scenario. The Mycenaean expedition to Troy succeeds but weakens the Greek kingdoms so severely that they become vulnerable to internal collapse. Displaced warriors, their homes destroyed, become sea-roving raiders seeking new lands to settle. Theory 3. The Anatolian displacement. The most compelling theory suggests the Sea Peoples originated from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, as the Hittite Empire collapsed. As central authority broke down, displaced populations from across the empire may have banded together as maritime raiders. This would explain their apparent organization and their knowledge of Bronze Age warfare tactics. They weren't barbarians. They were the remnants of collapsed civilizations fighting for survival. But here's the theory that might explain everything, and it's more terrifying than any invasion. The domino effect theory. What if the Sea Peoples weren't the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, but rather its most visible symptom? Modern historians are increasingly convinced that what we're seeing is history's first recorded example of systemic collapse, a domino effect that brought down the ancient world's interconnected economy. Here's how it might have worked. The Bronze Age civilizations were incredibly dependent on trade networks. Bronze itself required tin and copper from different regions, meaning even basic tools and weapons depended on international commerce. Palace economies controlled vast bureaucracies that managed everything from taxation to food distribution. Now imagine a scenario where climate change disrupts agriculture, causing food shortages. Kingdoms can't support their massive bureaucracies. Trade networks begin to fail as regions become unstable. Without bronze tools and weapons, societies can't maintain their military superiority. As each civilization weakens, it becomes vulnerable to attack, which further destabilizes the system. The Sea Peoples may have been groups of displaced refugees who became raiders out of necessity, creating a feedback loop of destruction that spiraled completely out of control. Think of it as the ancient world's first global economic collapse, complete with climate change, supply chain failures, and mass migration. Sound familiar? But not everyone was destroyed. Egypt survived, though weakened. Some regions adapted and evolved. The Philistines, who many scholars believe were part of the Sea Peoples Confederation, settled in what is now Gaza and established a lasting civilization. The Phoenicians emerged from the chaos to dominate Mediterranean trade for the next several centuries. In Greece, the collapse of the palace system eventually gave rise to the city-states that would produce classical Greek civilization. This raises a crucial question. Were the sea peoples actually destroyers, or were they unwitting catalysts for a new phase of human civilization? What do you think? Were the sea peoples villains or victims of circumstances beyond their control? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're loving this deep dive into ancient mysteries, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more incredible historical mysteries coming your way. The Sea Peoples crisis offers chilling parallels to modern global challenges. Climate change, economic interdependence, mass migration, and systemic collapse. These aren't just ancient problems. Consider how quickly our modern global supply chains can be disrupted, as we saw during recent pandemics and conflicts. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that even the most sophisticated civilizations are vulnerable when multiple crises converge. The Sea Peoples story also highlights how environmental pressures can trigger massive population movements that destabilize entire regions. As climate change continues to affect global agriculture and coastal regions, we might see similar patterns of displacement and conflict. But there's one more shocking revelation about the Sea Peoples that most historians don't want to talk about. Here's what makes the Sea Peoples absolutely unique in ancient history. They seem to have deliberately destroyed records and administrative systems wherever they went. This wasn't just conquest, it was systematic erasure of bureaucratic civilization. Linear B tablets from Mycenaean palaces show that these were highly organized societies with complex administrative systems. Yet after the Sea Peoples passed through, these writing systems simply disappeared. It would be centuries before Greeks developed alphabetic writing again. This suggests the Sea Peoples may have been deliberately targeting the palace-based administrative systems that controlled Bronze Age society. Were they primitive barbarians, or were they conducting sophisticated psychological warfare designed to prevent their enemies from reorganizing? The truth is, we may never know for certain because the Sea Peoples were so effective at destroying the very records that could tell us who they really were. The Sea Peoples remain one of history's greatest mysteries, but their impact is undeniable. They marked the end of the Bronze Age and helped usher in a new era of human civilization. Whether they were climate refugees, displaced warriors, or something else entirely, they forever changed the course of Mediterranean history. What fascinates me most is how their story reminds us that even the mightiest civilizations can disappear almost overnight when faced with the perfect storm of challenges. If you enjoyed diving into this ancient mystery, you absolutely need to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're exploring more incredible historical puzzles that will blow your mind. And let me know in the comments, what ancient mystery should we investigate next? Hit that like button if the Sea Peoples story amazed you. Share this video with anyone who loves ancient history, and I'll see you in the next video where we uncover more secrets from humanity's forgotten past.